Members, and welcome to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. I'm going to ask Hannah, our clerk to the meeting, are there any apologies for absence?
There are apologies from Assemblymember Badenoch, for whom there is no substitute.
We've got no substitute
Thank you.
today. Our main item today will be questioning the Commissioner for Transport, Mike Brown. But we've got a few items of formal business to quickly go through first. If people are taking part in social media and want to use hashtags, it's apparently hashtag TfL Commissioner, hashtag Assembly Transport. We have a few people in the public gallery, and I'm sure lots more people watching this on home. But if you've got electronic devices, phones, please put them all on silent. And that includes the audience as well, please. We had someone's phone kept going off throughout one of our, might have even been our last meeting. Declarations of interest. Can we note the list of officers held, and have any members got any other interest to declare? No? Lovely. Minutes. Can we confirm minutes of our meeting on the 2nd of February to be signed as a correct record? Yes. Lovely, thank you. Summary list of actions. Can we note completed and outstanding actions arising from our previous meetings? Yes. Thank you. Right, let's move then straight into our main item then. It's fantastic to have Mike Brown before us again, our kind of annual catch-up with the Commissioner at Transport for London. We've got a wide range of questions to ask. I'm just going to go straight in with one of the topics, if that's okay.
I wondered, Chair, if I may just, I wasn't going to sort of make a long opening statement, but I wondered, given that this is the first time I've been in front of the committee since the terrible accident in Croydon, if I might just acknowledge that. And obviously,
over to you if you want to say a few words, of course.
Because you know, I do want to say that obviously, following the tragic tram derailment at Sandylands last November, my thoughts, and I'm sure thoughts of all members of the committee, remain with those who sadly lost their lives, with their families, of course, and those who were affected in any other way through injury or being connected with the incident in any way, shape or form. I wanted also, Chair, if I may, just to take the opportunity of acknowledging the tremendous support I had from the Mayor and the Mayor's office at that very sad time. Also, if I may, and I know he's not yet here, from Assembly Member Steve O'Connell, whose support was unstinting during the time, as also was the Minister for London and the local MP Gavin Barwell and the leader of the borough, Tony Newton. So the support that they gave at that time, I think, is and continue to give, what was really appreciated. It was a terrible accident. We continue to work with the Rail Accident Investigation Branch and will, of course, continue to take on board any recommendations as they emerge. We already have taken on recommendations from the interim reports, and will continue to follow up as more reports emerge, and as indeed we make our own assessment of what other measures might be appropriate. But I just thought, Chair, with apologies, it was appropriate for me to say that, acknowledge that very tragic incident.
Absolutely, thank you very, very much indeed for that. I want to go straight into the issue of taxi and private hire. And really just say, what progress has TfL made on implementing changes to taxi and private hire services since the committee's future-proof report in December 2014?
Well, thank you very much for that. So clearly there's a number of areas that we're taking to follow up in the Mayor's Taxi and Private Hire Action Plan. First one being an English language requirement for private hire drivers, which obviously is subject to some legal proceedings, so I will be slightly circumspect with what I say here, but suffice to say that there was very strong support for this proposal in the first consultation that was held in March 2015. Some 95% of private hire operators, 88% of drivers and 99% of respondents overall were in favour of some such requirement being applied. And the second consultation, as you will be aware, Chair, was in September 15, and again asked participants whether they supported that drivers should be able to demonstrate they have sufficient knowledge of English language at an intermediate level. This again received very strong support, with some 80% in favour there. So obviously I've been concerned that we have a proper impact assessment, which is around as much ensuring that people are able to fulfil the requirements for them, those who are private hire drivers, but also recognising the genuine issues around public perception and people's concern that a driver in a private hire vehicle that they might be in are able to understand them if they have a particular health issue or some issue emerges during the course of the journey or is an imperative in the journey. So clearly that's one area that, as I say, it is subject to a judicial review process at the moment, so in the courts as we speak, and we're expecting an outcome tomorrow. Other areas that, of course, we're following up on is the feasibility of looking at removing the exemption for private hire vehicles entering the congestion charging zone. This is still under review. The reason that this is taking a bit of time, Chair, is because I want to make sure, we want to make sure that we don't unwittingly place a huge burden on those very small private hire operators, perhaps on the outskirts of London, those that actually fulfil a very important community role because of the nature of short journeys that some people need to make in parts of outer London in particular. And obviously I want to make sure that any change to the congestion charge exemption doesn't overly penalise those small operators. So we're still looking at that. Other areas where we're quadrupling the number of compliance officers, where recruitment continues there, on target for 250 new staff to be in post by the summer, and 105 additional enforcement officers have commenced work so far, which is really important. And I know Keith, to your left, was out recently on an exercise and got a chance to look at what they do. And clearly there is, I think, more opportunity going forward to engage with the taxi trade, to ensure that the deployment of these resources, that they have a proper input into the deployment of these resources so that we can tackle what we need to tackle. We've opened up more bus lanes, 15 out of the 20 that we proposed to do, including the taxi trade's much requested northbound London Bridge site, and I continue to discuss with representatives of the trade what other opportunities might exist and what we might do in partnership with the boroughs to encourage more bus lanes to be opened up if appropriate. So we continue to look at that. We're ahead of our target to increase by at least 20%, that's 100 in total, the number of taxi ranks by 2020. So far out of that 100, 74 have been delivered. But of course, just to reassure you, we're not going to stop when we've reached that target. We'll keep going as well to ensure that we identify any potential new locations. Some stuff which seems pretty basic, but I think is really important as well, is finalising trial of toilet access at tube stations. So that's about to happen very soon, with a trial of that, which I think is really important. And again, new private hire regulations came into force in June last year, with more time permitted for existing licensees to meet the more significant changes. Over 30,000, I should say, Chair, drivers have had their insurance documents spot checked since June, with actually a very high level of 99.9% compliance in terms of insurance. But those drivers that didn't have the correct insurance, of course, are having their licences reviewed. And there's been a further number who've had warning letters for not actually having all the relevant paperwork, regardless of the status of their insurance, but they need to have the paperwork with them at all times. So I think it's fair to say there's a lot of work progressing. There is still more to do. There's a lot of ongoing activity still to do. But overall, we're trying to get some sensible, pragmatic steps to make sure that the industry is properly regulated, but also properly is available to serve the public in London.
Okay, let's pick up a few things. Do you think there'll be fewer licensed private hire drivers as a result of your English language requirement?
There may be. I think it's a bit too early to say what the impact would be, but I would certainly, going back to what I said, I would certainly hope that those drivers that are there would be of a standard that was able to properly communicate with those in their vehicles, and I think that's a very important factor. So I think it's a bit too early to say what the actual number impact would be.
And the deadline for drivers to have gone through this is? Well,
it's September is where we're talking about. So we've given a little bit longer timeline.
Okay. I won't go into detail on that because I realise there's the court case. There are other things I probably would like to ask, but I understand you won't be able to because of the court case. Bus lanes, you talked about the ones TfL is responsible for. What about the boroughs? How are you getting on getting the boroughs to open up their bus lanes to taxis?
So actually there's a further, so of the 50, I said there was 15 out of 20 that we've managed to reopen. The boroughs, there's some 40 bus lanes on roads that the boroughs control that we are in active discussion with the boroughs around access, consideration for access to taxis on those. Clearly the taxi trade has a sort of priority scale, if you like, for how important those are, and we're trying to work with them to ensure that we've got an individual set of activities to try and get movement on those in a priority.
Are the boroughs being receptive?
Yes, I think so. I think everyone recognises this is an opportunity, and as long as there isn't an impedance of the bus network and that we can kind of keep traffic moving more generally, then I think there's some ones that we can make quite quick progress on. Yeah.
And could you just clarify the exact number of additional compliance officers? You mentioned the figures. Yeah, so there'll be 250 in post by summer, which is, I think a real step. Because there are only 60 or so before. Absolutely. So this is a really important change, and as I say, and it is worth emphasising, Chair, so forgive me for repeating myself, but just having the taxi trade involved in helping on the strategic deployment of those compliance officers. Because I think sometimes in the past, and not necessarily criticism, but it's a product of having a very small number previously, that we have assumed that we know best where their deployment would be best carried out. Actually, I want to have a much greater interactive dialogue with the trade as to where they can be deployed. Great. Keith, you wanted to come in on that after your site visit?
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to thank you and your team for keeping me out in the cold from 11 o'clock till nearly 3 in the morning. Sorry about that. I looked around for my friends and it all disappeared. A bit like a pub fight, really. Anyway, very, very informative, brilliant work that they're doing. And totally justifies the need for the extra officers. Yeah. But one thing that was very, very clear is that there's a need for your officers to have more powers. At the moment, you are very reliant on the Met, and I think it is useful having the Met present, but at the stop where I was at, there was a good half a dozen Met police officers, which I'm sure is not something they can do very often, nor can they do it in great numbers across the whole of London. So, but to be able to have one officer there at least would be a good thing, I think. But you don't have the powers needed. So can I ask you how you're progressing with that, and is there anything we can do to help?
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful, once again, to emphasise, it was really grateful you did go out and have a look. That meant a lot to the team, actually, so thank you for that. I think this is actually, it's interesting, just only yesterday I was compiling a sort of list of items that would be on my first meeting agenda with the new Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and actually this was, interestingly enough, one of the items that I would like to discuss with her. So I think perhaps, if you'll forgive me, it's a bit too early to say how exactly we'll make that happen, but I do take the point. I mean, in a sense it's like street parking or anything else, that actually those charged with enforcement and compliance are actually, it's enhanced hugely just by having a single police officer, or even a community support officer sometimes just present, gives that sense of authority that backs up what the compliance officers are trying to achieve. So it's a very well made point, and I think there is more work to do there. So I should keep the committee informed of progress there.
Sure. I mean, the example was one of the drivers bang out of order, but he was getting a bit heated, but of course he chose not to get too heated with the Metropolitan Police officer.
Absolutely.
Exactly. But can I just ask a cheeky question, as you were talking about bus lanes? I do apologise. What about motorcyclists? We promised we would, or there was a promise that we'd try and get more bus lanes open to motorcyclists in the outer boroughs. Can I ask you what progress, or can I ask you to take that away and come back to me?
Yes, I will come back to it. Perhaps if I could write to you on progress on that. I know we have been looking at that. It is a complex issue, as you understand, and there are lots of arguments for and against that, but I'm very, very conscious of the work that the committee has been doing in this area, so I hear you, and I will certainly get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Right, and I think if we can, we will, I'm no doubt do a long letter from this with some follow-ups. Sure. I think the stuff you said on taxi and private hire, if we could have the time scales for some of these actions, it really does sound like you're making progress, but I think
Absolutely.
we'd like to know some of the exact dates so we can hold you to account.
Yeah.
Let's move on to looking at cycling and healthy streets. Caroline, you're going to pick that up.
Thank you. Yes, healthy streets includes cycling, walking, and people enabling people to use public transport as well. So it's a very positive and sort of forward-looking sort of way of working for London. And what I'm really interested in is how we are going to know that the healthy streets approach has been properly embedded in TfL's policies and, you know, every level through the organisation, that people are actually thinking about delivering on healthy streets.
Well, absolutely. So, as you will be aware, a total of 2.5 billion is being invested to get more people cycling, walking, and to improve public safety and air quality overall. And this actually includes a record amount of 154 million a year to spend on cycling schemes and initiatives to improve cycling, as well as some 875 million on actions to improve air quality. Then if you add to that 400 million of funding to London's boroughs over the next 5 years through the LIPS process to help them deliver healthy streets as well. I think what is really important for me is that having the new Walking and Cycling Commissioner, Will Norman, now in place
is
in the audience.
he did warn me he might bow. He did warn me, so I should have a rear view mirror, shouldn't I really? But I'm genuinely delighted that Will has joined us, and one of the things that we've really set in place prior to Will's arrival it picks up your point, Caroline, about an internal recalibration of how we deal with this. So we're going to have a Healthy Streets Portfolio Board that is now up and running internally. That brings together the decision makers, all the decision makers within the organisation, as well as from colleagues from City Hall. And this board, so-called, this group, will assess investment decisions against all the Healthy Street indicators using the Health Economic Assessment tool for walking and cycling, and a new Healthy Streets check on every single scheme. So we'll get the right prioritisation, the right governance, probably an overused term, but for this context it's the right term. I want to make sure this is a totally different way of doing business. So that's the sort of internal bit. Then if you look at our TfL Board Committee, the Programmes and Investment Committee, which again is a new committee that is set up with the creation of the new board. This will direct investment towards the Mayor's priorities, assess progress against those healthy street indicators that I described, and will also ensure that our day-to-day decision-making process prioritise delivery against those indicators as a matter of course. Now, inevitably, as you set this up, as a Healthy Streets portfolio is set up to start with, there is a little bit of bedding in as you bring together areas of activity that were perhaps run in different siloed activity. But frankly, I'm really pleased with the progress we're already making in bringing this together. And if you ally to that new targets, key performance indicators that will ensure we assess our progress against the Healthy Streets approach, those will be published in the spring, so very soon. So you have a clear line of sight as to what the impact is against the measurable set of objectives of the overall portfolio going forward. So I think that, having looked at that, having had an initial discussion with Will about that, that looks to me to be a good starting point. I'm sure it will evolve over time. I'm sure there'll be things within that we don't quite get right immediately, but I think it's probably the right way to start.
And what are you doing to make sure that because it sounds like you've got the governance structure right. That sounds very, very positive to actually have a Healthy Streets board. I really look forward to seeing how the indicators are actually going to be measured, but are you saying that's being published in the spring, so you can't explain to us how something like pedestrians from all walks of life or places to stop and rest? I mean, that one is obviously quite easy to measure, places to stop and rest, but some of them are slightly more subjective. Is it how are you going to be doing surveys, or how are you going to measure this?
Yes, I think there'll be a combination of some quantitative measures, as you described, that are quite easy just to measure, the yes or no, or the percentages of delivery or whatever. And there will be then some qualitative work that we have to look at as well. So that will be part of the evolution of the series of metrics going forward. It's also worth saying that the Healthy Streets Programmes and Investment Committee paper is already online for the forthcoming meeting, and that does present the strategic case for the Healthy Streets Programme. So I know members of the committee will, if not have a look at it already, will be keen to have a look at that, because this does talk about constituent projects as they currently are proposed, as well as the governance arrangements that I just went through. And it also is actually going to be seeking approval from that committee through eventually the board for £439 million worth of delivery in 2017-18 and in the subsequent years. So this is really getting the kind of financial approvals behind what is a pretty ambitious programme, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, in terms of all this massive investment, you're obviously going to be working very closely with the boroughs.
Yeah.
Are there going to need to be changes in the way that the LIP process works because obviously you're bringing about a big culture change within TfL, but you've also got all the people working in the boroughs who are hopefully going to actually deliver these livable neighbourhoods and more people-friendly streets. What's going to have to change in terms of the way your relationship with the boroughs and the way that money gets given out?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Livable Neighbourhoods programme will replace the LIP major schemes and will fund large-scale, something in the order of total cost of £1 to £5 million, area-based schemes to deliver healthy streets in and around town centres, residential areas, making them more attractive in places in which to walk, cycle and indeed spend time. So there will be a reconfiguration of that. Of course, I talk on a regular basis with the Transport Committee of London Councils, chaired by Julian Bell from Ealing, and there's a regular dialogue actually at all levels within the organisation with the boroughs as to how this is going to work. So I think it's not about trying to be too overall controlling from the centre, but it is trying to, if you like, create a framework within which the boroughs can help deliver this agenda within their own local priorities.
I think just being a little bit more specific here, there are some boroughs who will probably buy into the objectives of healthy streets, which is very clear about wanting fewer journeys made by private car and more journeys made on foot, by bike and by public transport. So it's how will you make sure that these livable neighbourhoods and the healthy streets approach is delivered across all boroughs when you've maybe got some boroughs who are less amenable to the idea?
Yes, and I think, you're absolutely right to say that. Of course, that is inevitable that some boroughs move at a slightly different pace but for whatever reason than some others. So I think we have to, that's why we need a little bit of a kind of framework in which the money that goes to them is spent within, while recognising, as I say, that they need some flexibility within that. So I think there's a lot of power of persuasion for some places that will be required. Other boroughs will need no persuasion whatsoever and are desperate to get on and do this, which is great. But, I think the other really exciting thing is, and Will be assisting me and the rest of the team in doing this, is that the joined up nature of having walking, cycling, Will is absolutely, I guess we'll come on to it, Chair, absolutely mindful of the challenges and opportunities for the bus service as well around London and how important that is for people getting around. So I think having this overall joined up approach is something materially different from anything we've had before. So early days, and you're right to ask me the question. I'm confident and optimistic we will get to the right place, but I need to keep the pressure on those boroughs that perhaps we need to do a bit more work with.
Mm-hmm. And you've had over this last sort of couple of years with the delivery of the Mini Holland programmes, and those there's been a lot of people campaigning for them, a lot of people campaigning against them. People get very worried about change. Are there any specific things that you've learned from those consultation processes that will come forward into your sort of lessons of how this is going to be delivered moving forwards?
Well, I think I think, again, it goes back to what we've just been saying. It is about engagement at an early stage. And you know, I know Will is very keen to ensure that engagement happens at an early stage so that we can keep the delivery momentum of Mini Hollands, and also ensure that where there are concerns from members of the public about Mini Hollands, so for example, some concerns in somewhere like Enfield, for example, it's making sure that consultation is carried out correctly and that we are able to respond appropriately to that consultation, while recognising also that a joined-up cycling network across the city is what we're really trying to get to here, mindful of walking as well as part of that, and buses for that point as well. But, you know, one of the early discussions Will and I have been having is how you ensure, and I know he's coming to see you at some point himself, so I don't want to steal all his thunder, but you know, is how you kind of make sure people feel connected. So if they're on the so-called cycle superhighways, they're then going on to the quiet ways, then perhaps onto the Mini Hollands. Does it feel like it's a coherent journey from start to finish, or do people kind of feel that they just get to the end of a line of route and suddenly it all stops and all signage stops and you're kind of left sort of abandoned on a conventional road? So I think all of that is part of that. So, you know, we have to continue to learn lessons about Mini Holland so far, but I'm very confident we've got a good coherent plan going forward, and of course at headline level for the next phase as well of the cycle superhighways routes.
Well, that's what I was just going to come on to. If we're talking about a network, obviously for people on bikes, those networks go from borough to borough, they go right across the city.
Yes.
Can you give us a bit of an update on what you're expecting to be delivered, what you're next planning to consult on in terms of those more long-distance cycling routes?
Yes, of course. So we'll complete phase 2 of the North-South Superhighway, deliver new cycle superhighways 4, 9 and 11 as well, which is good, as well as phase 2 of the East-West route, obviously subject to consultation and approval. So they will significantly improve cyclist and indeed pedestrian experience overall, and create great new public spaces too. So the cycle superhighway routes, you know, going forward, I mean, obviously we've got cycle superhighway 1, Tottenham to the City, 2, Stratford to Aldgate, 3, Barking to Tower Gateway, 5, Oval to Pimlico, 7, Merton to the City, 8, Wandsworth to Westminster. So increasingly covering large swathes of London as well. Of course, our business plan includes at least 20 quiet-way routes, with the first 7 delivered in 16-17, the year that we're in. Another 11 will be delivered by March 2019, and plus development and delivery of new routes currently identified and being prioritised through the overall analysis that we're doing. So I think, you know, the overall family of schemes, if you like, it is around ensuring we continue the momentum, obviously being mindful of local issues as they emerge, but also I think just making this as a joined up network, and also, and this I guess is the fundamental difference from where we might have been in the past, is being mindful of the impact on pedestrians, on public space and on the bus network as well, to ensure that we're able to keep the city moving.
Sounds like a lot of things, a lot of balls to keep juggling.
It is, but it's very exciting, and I think, you know, I really do feel hugely optimistic about this. I think if you'd asked me previously this question several years ago, I would have said, well, look, this is, you know, we're making the first forays into this. Is it as joined up as it might be? Probably not. Were some of the time imperatives that we delivered against the right ones? Probably not. Now, I really do feel this is going to turn into a very coherent, very credible plan.
Thank you.
Lovely. And before I've got some other members I want to bring in, can I welcome students from the University of Westminster, the Politics and International Relations Department, I guess. Welcome. This is the Transport Committee, and we have the Commissioner of TfL before us answering questions on lots of topics today. Now, I've got 2 members who wanted to come in on this, Tom and Joanne. I don't know who wants to go first.
I want to come in after the consultation questions.
Should I bring Joanne in first? Is that okay, Tom? And then Joanne.
I don't know if Caroline's doing the consultation questions.
She's done them.
Probably. Okay,
Joanne.
because I wanted to come on to, because I've been a big supporter of the Mini Holland scheme. Very pleased we got the money in Enfield. But of course you'll be aware that there's a lot of opposition, particularly from traders. And I just wondered, and I've been getting some emails in from traders, because the building works are starting outside their premises. They seem to be taking for a long time, and they're seeing their trade dropping off. And I'm just wondering, have you looked at what can be done to speed up roadworks that are outside business premises in particular? Because that, you know, traders telling me they're losing thousands of pounds.
It's a really good point, and it is something I continually ask just on my own travels around the city and looking at various places myself. I continue to apply that question, that pressure to my own team as to what more we could do. And as ever, there is a balance. You will understand this very well, between what work you can do in what might be described as less social hours in terms of night time, where you've often some of these trading premises have sort of you know, flats adjacent to, or you know, domestic residences nearby. And what you don't want to do, of course, is say that you'll work all night to expedite the work and then find out that actually that's just making it a pretty unlivable situation, albeit over a shorter time, for the residents affected. So these things are always a balance. I will take away the specific point around the Enfield construction, just see if there's any more we can do.
It's particularly around Bush Hill Avenue.
Right, okay, well, I'll certainly take that away, and perhaps if I can get back to you directly on that, Joanne, I will do so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of opposition from traders come because they believe it will ultimately affect their bottom line, their business. Yeah. I know TfL have said that actually if you make a place more livable, you may attract people. So I want to know, is TfL doing any evaluation about the effect of businesses on these cycle schemes?
Well, I think I'm not aware that we are doing anything specific, but it's a very well made point. I mean, the one observation I would give, you know, on those, even those routes within central London where you've had new cycle routes created. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day as I walked along the embankment outside Portcullis House, and that whole environment, that riverbank environment, is totally transformed for pedestrians as a result of there being that larger gap between you as a pedestrian and the traffic flows, because you've got the cycle lane in between. So I do think it makes a more livable space, a more walkable space, a more pleasant space, and that's as true actually in some of the mini Holland schemes or the quiet ways as well, to a different extent, but it still does, I think, just open up you know, more opportunities for people to move around and hopefully therefore use local businesses. But it is a worthwhile point. I'll take away and just see if we can do any work on that. I mean, it may well be beyond our remit, but I think we'll certainly have a look and see what we can do.
I should just say, Will was nodding to both of those things, Joanne, so I think he's on top of those already. But we'll go into some of this real detail next month on all of this, because I think it's really important. Karen, you had a very quick nugget to come back in, and then I'll bring Tom.
Someone's actually just tweeted me to ask if two options score equally in terms of the healthy streets indicators, and one is politically easier, say benches versus cycle tracks, how would we not only get the benches, you know, how are those priorities going to be managed between the different indicators of a healthy street?
I think that's the advantage of having a group that looks at this in the round. So that's exactly what we do. In that situation, we look in the round, we'd see whether we could do both, whether there's some reconfiguration of the scheme that allows the maximum benefit for both cyclists and pedestrians and the space itself. Clearly, if there's some ultimate conflict and you just can't reconcile the two, then you have to make an ultimate decision as to what is the right thing to do. But I'm not aware we've had one that is actually so closely balanced on the edge, but clearly we would look at those on their own merits if that did emerge.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Tom, you're going to come in on walking, and then going to move on to the next section, which will be traffic congestion, but on walking first.
Thank you. Well, one pedestrian scheme, or I should say so-called pedestrian scheme, because many of us around this table don't regard it as a transport project, is the Garden Bridge. And I've got a few questions for you about that in relation to, as I'm sure you're aware, the letter I wrote to you on the 9th of January about TfL's former Managing Director of Planning, Richard Decani, lobbying the Department for Transport over the awarding of funds to the Garden Bridge project, despite the fact he'd already given notice to you that he was on his way to work at Arup, a major contractor of the Garden Bridge, and I regard this as a conflict of interest, a very major conflict of interest. So first of all, I want you to confirm that irrespective of the signing of the construction contract for the bridge, the release of funding to the Garden Bridge Trust was subject to the Trust satisfying a number of conditions as set out in the deed of grant.
Yes, I mean, I think what I would say on the Garden Bridge, if I may, Chair, and I'm not going to be evasive with you, Tom, but clearly I have, as a number of colleagues, both past and present, have been talking to Dame Margaret Hodge, who's been carrying out the review into the whole procurement process for the Mayor, commissioned by the Mayor to do that work, and I've met with Margaret Hodge. We had a very long, I think very productive meeting of probably over an hour a few months ago, and we await her report. And just to reassure the committee, I will of course be considering that report in its entirety and taking whatever necessary steps that there might be that emerge from the procurement process to tighten up on that going forward. You know, the Mayor's made his position very clear, as you know, on the Garden Bridge, that he doesn't want to see any more public funds committed to it. I absolutely support that, and no grant payments have been made since he took office. And we've ceased all expenditure on the project from a TfL perspective. So, you know, from my perspective, I mean, obviously I've talked to you before about individuals, but I do think, if I may, that is best covered by the recommendations that Margaret Hodge is doing on behalf of the Mayor. So I'm not sure I can add much value on top of what I've already said to her and others on. But
there are just a couple of things I want to get straight, and I'm not going to go on for very long.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things I want to get facts. I want to get straight in my mind in terms of this, and I'm sure other members would appreciate this. But I want you to confirm that the release of funding to the Garden Bridge Trust was subject to the Trust satisfying a number of conditions set out in the deed of grant.
Yeah, well, yes, that would be the process.
That's the process.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So these are things such as the Trust has demonstrated to TfL satisfaction that it has secured or is able to secure a sufficient level of funding, including the grant from TfL, to cover the cost of construction of the Garden Bridge. There's a whole series of those conditions. Yeah. This means, of course, that the release of funding was ultimately at TfL's discretion and not automatically triggered by the signing of the construction contract.
Yes, I mean,
yes.
But I think also I would just refer you to the fact that this was not a project, and you know this because I've talked to you about it before, that was subject to the level of scrutiny that projects would have always done by the board, by the TfL board, because it was subject, before my time in this job, and indeed during my time in this job, to various mayoral directions that are on record from the previous mayor's time in office. So I think there's a reality of how that emerged over time.
I thank you for answering yes to that question. Was Mr. Takane, when he was Managing Director of Planning, was he the only person involved in determining whether or not the Trust has satisfied the funding conditions?
I don't know for certain the answer to that question. I don't know for certain.
And do you know exactly how TfL determined that the conditions had been satisfied?
The same thing. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could get back to me on those 2 points, I'd be very grateful. Thank you, Chair.
In our wider letter to pick up.
Thank you very much.
I think they're important clarifications.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll now go on to the next question, which is on congestion. Yeah. In the light of the committee's recent report on congestion, what consideration have you given to reforming the congestion charge?
So I obviously welcome, first of all, I should say, the committee's recent work in this area, and we look forward to responding to recommendations to the report in due course, of course. Now, as committee members will be aware, the causes of congestion are complex, but some of the key reasons for the increase in congestion over recent years are the huge increase we've seen in white vans, so-called small delivery vans, freight deliveries generally, major schemes, of course, happening in London, Thames Tideway Tunnel, and evidence just even by looking outside the window here of the large number of cranes and construction sites that are in place across the city in general. Again, volume of freight, but without always the consolidation that can support the increase in freight. There is some road enhancement that we've been doing. There's a huge amount of road enhancement boroughs have been doing as well. And of course there is the continual scourge of unplanned or incorrect utility works where we continue to rigorously prosecute offenders. So The Mayor has obviously said that he, with us, will reduce disruption caused by planned or unplanned incidents. We'll improve journey time reliability on that basis so that all road journeys have minimum delays in traffic conditions. So the infrastructure around the road network, traffic signals, road surfaces, we have to make sure those are reliable from our perspective, that faults are minimised. And again, picking up the point that Joanne raised, that any repairs that are required are carried out as quickly as possible. You will have noticed, I'm sure, that we've been trying to improve communication with road users, so a bit like in advance of tube journeys, users can make more informed decisions based on accurate and up-to-date information. And also, notwithstanding those offenders from the utility company perspective, how we can work more collaboratively with utility companies generally to coordinate maintenance and upgrading of the infrastructure. Again, we work, Chair, with the freight industry, reducing the number of deliveries where we can at the busiest times, looking at how we can do more to address personal deliveries on this, and looking at how consolidated deliveries could improve the situation, and also, although it's at the margin, how the river could be used more effectively to move some freight around as well. So if you look at that, we need to look at how we deliver cycle schemes going forward to ensure that they're done in a way that is mindful of the challenge of construction on a road network, while recognising the fantastic benefit of the end of those schemes being delivered. And also, we're investing some 200 million in bus priority schemes to across the city to restore bus reliability back to its previous levels as well. So I think, you know, our Healthy Streets approach, which I was talking about before, is obviously an integral part of this as well, how we can reduce traffic in London generally. We're going to keep the congestion charge under review. It's been successful from its original concept, but we'll certainly keep it under review to ensure it continues to meet its objectives. And you know, one of the most immediate examples is adapting it to tackle some of the air quality challenge, so the so-called T-charge, the £10 additional charge on emissions there, on the most polluting vehicles coming into the city. I don't think anyone would have issue with. That's a very important health issue. Obviously, bringing forward the introduction of the ultra-low emission zone, bringing that forward quicker to 2019 instead of 2020, and indeed looking at expanding it as well. This is all up for consultation, of course, but expanding it to the north and south circular roads. So I think there are a number of things that we're considering as well. The forthcoming Mayor's transport strategy, and I don't want to reveal everything that's in it at the moment because it is still work in progress, as you will be aware, but this will set out in more detail the Mayor's long-term strategy for tackling congestion and reducing traffic levels in London. So there is a lot going on clearly on in this whole area, which we'll continue to work on.
Thank you for that answer. On the congestion charge, obviously, I mean, you know, I think a lot of us here believe the congestion charge is a good thing, but of course it's I think an old system now, 15 years old, I think, the technology. Yeah. How adaptable is it? I mean, would it be possible, for example, one of the issues we found is that, of course, once you've paid it, you've paid it. So there's no disincentive. In fact, there might be an incentive to drive around to central London more because you've paid your money. Is it possible to adapt it so that people have to pay another charge when they come, if they've left and then they come back in, for example?
Well, I think the existing system, you're quite right, is quite clunky actually, because when the technology that was in place at that time, you know, only allowed you to have a relatively clunky system. I think what's exciting is that going forward, and again, I don't want to preempt what might emerge in the Mayor's transport strategy for the medium long-term views of what we might do with congestion management in London, but I do know, and there'll be no surprise to members of the committee, that technology is such that it can be much more in the moment, or even on particular lines of route or times of day or whatever else requirement you might seek to apply. That wouldn't be possible with the existing system, so it would require new technology to be applied. But you know, depending on what emerges in the Mayor's transport strategy, anything is possible.
What research have you done about possible introduction of road pricing in London? And do you think it would have a positive effect in terms of congestion? Yeah,
I mean, what I would say is that going back to what I said earlier on, that actually anyone bringing a car into London has got the wrong end of the stick of how life should be lived in a great city such as this, in my view. This is a city where there's been a huge increase in public transport provision, in the reliability of public transport services. As soon as next year, we add 10% further to the transport capacity of the city with the introduction of the Elizabeth line through the central part of London. And I really do think that for the future of this city and how it operates, car usage and moving around by car in the city is not where we want to get to. Having said that, you then have to ensure, and as I say, the T-charge is one such lever that you can apply, as is the ultra-low emission zone, to ensure that people are helped in their decision-making processes going forward as to what method they choose to travel in and around the city. So again, I don't want, forgive me, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I don't want to preempt what's going to be in the Mayor's transport strategy. All I would say is that there is a full, all-encompassing debate that we've been having as we form the thinking around the Mayor's transport strategy, and I'm very excited. I think this will be a really revolutionary document.
I'm interested, even you've talked about the ULEZ. I know you keep saying you don't want to preempt the Mayor's transport strategy, but would the technology involved in putting in the ULEZ also be adaptable for if the Mayor chose to introduce a road pricing scheme?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially.
Potentially.
And would you be looking to make sure that any system that you chose was as adaptable as possible?
Yes, I think inevitably it would be, actually, because I think the nature of the technology now is that you almost would automatically get that for a very small incremental cost. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Yeah. What do you think the prospects are of the government devolving vehicle excise duty to London? Well,
Londoners pay about £500 million a year to central government through vehicle excise duty. The way it's allocated and spent in the UK is changing. So all VED in England goes into a road fund to pay for investment in the strategic road network managed by Highways England from 2020. Highways England does not manage the strategic road network in London. We do. And therefore, we would make an assertion that actually a proportion of that money that would be required for the road network in London should come to us. It's also interesting to note, and members will be aware, that following the 2015 spending review, our operational grant from central government will be removed from 2018-19. So for this year, it's 447 million, goes down to 227 million next year, and zero thereafter. That means there is a net operating deficit, which we have to make up, in effect, from cross-subsidising fares on the buses and the tubes, which I have to say, by any macroeconomic analysis anywhere in the world, is insane. But that's what will risk happening in London unless we get some recognition that vehicle excise duty should be allocated in proportion and in the right way to London. So we continue to make that point to...
Well, it's an incredibly strong case, isn't it, that we should, if we're essentially, are we essentially subsidising the rest of the country if we're not getting anything for our roads and TfL's having to pay for them and no operational grant from the government?
Well, we're certainly not getting our fair cut, would be my view. So I think it is an incredibly logical case, and I look forward to being responded to in that way.
Can I ask, it's one of my issues I've been quite interested in, the prospect of workplace parking. I don't think TfL has done any modelling on this. Is there a particular reason why that's not taken place, to see how much money perhaps a workplace parking levy would raise in London?
Well, I know some members have been interested in that. We haven't done a lot of work on that today, but it is, of course, one of the issues we could consider strategically as well. So I think it's not, I understand that individual members take care of that. Although I would go back to what I said earlier, that still, would seem to be based on the premise that people bring a car to work. I would rather the new construction that we see here outside the window and we see elsewhere in the city, that there wasn't parking provision applied, because actually the best way to get into the city is by tube or bus.
And finally, in terms of reducing delivery van traffic, I wonder what your thoughts on our recommendations there were.
Well, yes. I mean, we obviously we continue to work with operators, boroughs and others across the freight industry to ensure that we can deliver goods and services as efficiently and safely as possible with the least impact on the environment. And we are encouraging operators to retime trips to outside peak hours and to work on consolidation. I recognise freight is very important for London's economy. Of course I do. But again, we're gathering evidence to inform what our future freight policy might be, and that will be part of, well, part of the London Plan and the Mayor's Transport strategy going forward. You know, I think, again, how could we encourage more freight deliveries, more freight activity by water on the river, by rail even, powered two-wheelers potentially, even bicycles actually, because not all of it, you know, when you look at what is in these small white vans, very often it's one or two parcels. That does not require a vehicle that is, you know, potentially polluting and also taking up a huge amount of road space in the city. So all of that, you know, employers can do their bit as well. I have to say, I've now made it clear that within TfL, I won't be permitting deliveries from online. Online recommendations for our offices or our locations going forward. I think, you know, you have to be mindful that actually in previous years it was difficult because actually you often had to go to a fairly far away delivery consolidation point, not necessarily near where you live. Yeah. Now, of course, there's more and more opportunities in local stores for consolidation to take place. So I think all of that just changes the whole paradigm going forward. So we're going to keep working on this. A lot more to do.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I'd come in really quickly on that.
I bet I know what you're going to. It's on my list. Go on, Florence.
So just on that delivery and how we reduce that delivery traffic across London, a group of us from the Transport Committee went to visit the Doddle store at Victoria last week, and I think, you know, really good initiative, and there are a number of range of initiatives across London in terms of shops. I know that the Co-op and other shops and areas where you can pick up parcels, but I think one of the things that came out from that visit was access to TfL sites and undergrounds, and in terms of trying to cut and change people's habits, if there was a really good system in terms of you pick up your parcel really close to a station and hop back on the tube or the bus, I think we would see a big drop in terms of some of the firms. So the question I'm asking is in terms of how and what discussions TfL will be having with firms like Doddle. Obviously there are other firms on the market to try and make that more real, especially when we're looking at new station redevelopments, new station being built, making sure we're not missing a trick on that in terms of, again, making that integrated system around, making it easier for people to pick up parcels.
Well, as you say, other operators are available, but yes, I take the point, and I think just to be clear, I have asked my commercial development team to look at that very issue to ensure that we are maximising whatever opportunities we have, either because there's available space in stations already, or exactly as you say, where there is work going on to expand or enlarge particular stations as well. So it's a very well made point. I'm absolutely onto it, and you're absolutely right. There are opportunities there.
Because I wanted to pick that up,
Yeah.
that key, it doesn't necessarily have to be at the station. They gave a very good example at Liverpool Street where they have a container effectively in the station, so a pop-up if you like, which you could have at a bus station or a key interchange. And at Paddington Station and run up to Christmas, they have 3,000 parcels a day going through there. And that's the volume. So I think there's huge potential there, and to think more than just where there's a space in the tube station, to think creatively on the wider estate.
Yes, I think that, no, I take that point, and I wouldn't confine our thinking to just the tube station, so you're absolutely right, very well made point.
But we're very, very keen to push that. I just want to pick up one thing before I bring Keith in. Tom was asking you some questions. Can I ask, has TfL done any research into looking at road pricing, reforming the congestion charge?
I'm not aware we've done any detailed research, but clearly we will be guided by whatever the Mayor's Transport Strategy comes up with as to what policy decisions we might...
But the Mayor has told us, you know, everything's on the table, as it were. He's looking at everything.
Yes.
Therefore, have you done some perhaps initial work looking at that just to help shape the transport
Well, I think just going back to what I said in the answer to Tom was, in terms of, you know, for example, recognising what technology exists out there, we've certainly been looking at that. There's certainly been some discussions, I know, with other cities who face similar challenges. You know, Manhattan, for example, in New York faces some very similar challenges with congestion and actually has remarkably considerably fewer levers than London does, and the Mayor has, in terms of what they might be able to do to rectify it. So, yes, I mean, clearly we're thinking about it because, in a sense, you would need to think about it as you craft the transport strategy. But it's not, you know, as I said, what we haven't done is gone into the full detail of what any reform system would be like, because clearly that would be the next phase of work if there were to be one after a transport strategy was produced.
Okay, so some just initial bits been done.
Exactly.
That's fine. That's helpful. Keith.
Thank you. On road pricing, clearly, if you just adopt road pricing, it will be quite an additional expense or potentially additional expense to drivers. Is there any, can you give drivers any commitment that it would be linked to vehicle exercise duty devolution at all?
Well, as I say, we haven't quite got that far yet in the analysis, Keith. I mean, I think, the gross income generated from the congestion charge, just to give you some figures, for 2015-16 was 258 million, but by the time you pay for the administration of the scheme and all the activities around it, the net income is 168 million. So you can see, given what I said earlier on about the gap, the shortfall that you get from not having vehicle excise duty devolved is clearly quite significant. So, what we do is we have to look at all of this in the round. What is the balance sheet look like for the road network in London, in effect, and how can we ensure that we're able to maintain it, to renew it where we can, to keep traffic moving, keep buses and cyclists and pedestrians properly supported in London streets, while recognising that the congestion charge still exists as it currently does, and in whatever consideration we give going forward following the Mayor's transport strategy.
Okay. David, do you want to come in on this, and then can you then move into your next section, which is on TfL savings?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I just stay on the issue of road pricing, you mentioned it's a very wide-ranging debate and you're listening to opinions and arguments from all sides. I've had a lot of concern from motorists, particularly motorists in outer London. You're considering new technology that might be able to monitor vehicles in real time, and there's a lot of concern that that will impact on civil liberties and privacy. I mean, a lot of drivers that have written to me and spoken to me are horrified of the idea that there's a government agency will be monitoring and charging people based on some unit in their car. What have you got to say about that, and what insurances can you give to London's motorists that that kind of system won't be put in place?
It absolutely won't. There is no question, because we would be breaching legal constraints if we did. And actually, I would use the parallel, if I may, with registered Oyster cards on the public transport network, because actually you could be potentially in the same situation, in that if somebody registers an Oyster card with us, in theory, you could argue that you can track where people's journeys are and what they're doing all the time. We don't do that. So there is a very clear wall in the process. That's a statutory wall that we have in place with our Oyster card system, and I would envisage exactly a parallel arrangement being in place for any such scheme with motorists going forward. So there's no question that's never our intention, and we would make absolutely sure it wasn't happening.
Okay, thank you. But that might not be the scheme that's put in place,
sure,
because we don't actually know the content of the future consultation anyway. Okay,
quite.
Right, thank you. But I'll move on to the main thing I was going to ask you about now, which is the budget and the savings that TfL has to make. And there's significant financial pressure on TfL, and you have plans to make £4 billion of savings and efficiencies over the next 5 years. How are you going to make those savings?
So our business plan is affordable, it is ambitious, it sets out exactly how we will drive efficiency through the biggest ever overhaul of our organisation since we were created, delivering savings of £4 billion, as you say, over the plan. And also we'll take fundamentally a different approach to raising other income with ambitious plans, for example, for the use of our land and retail estate. Members, I'm sure, will have noticed that as recently as this morning, we've announced a further development at Black Horse Road of 350 houses by 2022. The fourth such scheme now that the Mayor has announced with us, 50% of those homes will be affordable at Black Horse Road. It's yet another opportunity for both an income stream for TfL, but also to deliver much needed housing in and around London. Obviously, our business plan also allows us to continue with our major investment programme, Bakerloo Line extension, Northern Line, further upgrade overground lines, and continue to work on Crossrail 2, as well as East London River Crossing, Silvertown Tunnel, pedestrian cycle bridge, I hope, between Rotherhithe and Canary Wharf, investing, as you know, in the transformation of areas such as Old Street, Vauxhall, Waterloo, Stratford and Oxford Street, very importantly, and the 2.5 billion to get more people, as I've said, cycling and walking to improve public safety and air quality also. In terms of reducing costs, I'm pleased to say actually we're already making good progress. So if you look at our cost profile for this year, we've seen a quarter-on-quarter drop in actual costs against our budget. That's the first time that's happened in the history of TfL, but under the new CFO Ian Nunn and myself and the direction that we've given the organisation and the Mayor's leadership, we're absolutely following that through with the root and branch review, which has actually identified £4 billion worth of savings already. But just to give you a sense of where we've got to this year, by the end of Q3 of this financial year, we were over 138 million better against budget cumulatively for the year than where we might have been if we'd met budget. So that's a really significant enhancement. But just to give you a little bit more detail, David, if I may. So £2 billion from putting in place a new operating model, a different way of running the place, reducing management layers, merging currently separate functions. 49 senior managers have already left, saving £40 million over the next 5 years. We've saved already 70 million on IT projects, with more savings to follow. We're saving about £2 million every week, having reduced our non-permanent labour by almost 1,000 since December 2015. We're negotiating and bringing together the management of commercial contracts more. That will give us about another 2 billion. That's through savings of, for example, 80 million a year over the next 5 years by improving tube maintenance and looking at how we carry out that activity. More affordable processes, material and technology. For example, with our escalators, handrails and steps costing less while ensuring we keep the reliability of the assets in place. Further value for money from old contracts with consolidation, for example, of our head office and facilities management contracts, reducing our head office accommodation portfolio generally, and the cost of basic areas, but very important areas such as office cleaning and catering. So we have a series of work streams across the organisation. Senior managers in my team held accountable for delivery of those work streams. And I'm committed to ensure that we deliver a credible savings programme that keeps the focus on delivering a reliable, safe service, keeps the focus on delivering a capital programme going forward. But I am very confident. Ian Nunn and I just carried out our major review into the draft budget for next year, and I'm very confident that senior members in my team and their teams get the message loud and clear and have credible action plans to continue the delivery trajectory we're already seeing.
Thank you. It's a very full answer, and you've clearly thought a lot about it as an organisation. But are there any risks to staff, frontline staff perhaps, and services from the efficiency savings that you're making? And have you identified them?
Well, I think it's worth saying that some 80% of the spend of TfL is actually with external organisations. So it's based on our major contracts, obviously our major capital programmes in particular. So really, you're talking 20% of our cost base is actually around how we staff the organisation. And if you then take away from that the areas of savings that we need to work on within our consolidation of central functions, so for example, engineering, we've already committed to have engineering in one place across TfL. We've already committed to having capital programmes managed in one place within the organisation. So actually, my aim is to ensure that the frontline delivery of core services is absolutely preserved. And indeed, you will have seen recently that we're enhancing some of the, based on the increased numbers of people using the underground, and then the review that we've carried out on the staffing levels on the tube, that we've actually reviewed some of the numbers there. Yeah, I'm sure we will. So that's that's one example we're actually preserving, and indeed, where appropriate, enhancing frontline delivery is still a sustainable argument as part of this. So a lot of work to do. I don't want to underplay the level of effort and energy that's required here, but I'm really encouraged, again, under the leadership of the Mayor and the new board, that we have a pretty rigorous set of plans in place to deliver what we need to.
Great. You mentioned there, there's got to be 800 million average a year over the next 5 years of efficiency savings. And TfL published a broad breakdown of the money to be saved in the next fiscal year, highlighting 227.6 million pounds in a report, but cited commercial reasons as why you couldn't give any further details for the other majority of that 800 million. What were the commercial reasons, or why were there commercial reasons to prevent disclosing further details of the plan?
Well, clearly we have some contracts that are in place already with big suppliers to deliver, for example, the modernisation of the district circle metropolitan lines, to buy new trains, to procure new signalling, to do some particular road schemes that are in place, to proceed with the powers moving forward on the Silvertown crossing and other big schemes. And actually, it is very important that you are able to preserve your negotiation position by not up front putting all those numbers out in the public domain, because if you did so, of course, that becomes perfectly logically, it's not saying that our contractors, our partners are evil in any way, but they would then perfectly logically look at that as a base number by which they could, or ceiling number by which they could seek to get to. Of course, I would like to save even more money from some of the areas in our relationships with our contractors and demonstrate even greater value for money. So I think we have to, it genuinely isn't trying to hide anything, it just is, I've looked at this in quite a lot of detail, because I'm sure you will notice, and many assembly members who've been around perhaps for several years would, I hope, acknowledge that the transparency of the organisation has enhanced much more. We've actually got a set of financial data that's now understandable to ordinary people, whereas frankly sometimes it wasn't in the past. All of that is about increased transparency. On this subject, though, I am persuaded, I have asked the question myself, that we just have to be circumspect in what we do have out there.
So it's about negotiating.
It is, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Final question for me on this subject. You did mention 49 managers have been released, and so that you're making progress with the management restructure in TfL. When do you think that process will be completed?
Well, this is subject to the appropriate level of consultation that you need to do with trade union representatives and others, because even that applies at fairly senior levels within the organisation. So I wouldn't want to give a categoric date, because that would assume that I'm not going to be properly taking cognizance of consultation, and I'm absolutely determined that we do take genuine issues that are raised in the consultation process and we respond properly to them. So clearly, depending on what issues might be raised, the nature of the interactive dialogue that we've got with colleagues will determine the actual outcome. So I can't give you the categoric date, but I am confident. The reason I'm confident about the numbers being able to deliver it is by looking at the evidence of what we've managed to do so far. So I think you would quite rightly be saying to me, hang on, you haven't even started yet, if we hadn't seen progress. But as I say, the numbers we've seen, the cumulative £138 million worth of savings below budget we've delivered so far this year is, we have never, quarter on quarter, in the 17-year history of TfL, ever reduced our cost on a quarter-by-quarter basis, and we've done it every single quarter this financial year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keith, you wanted to pick up something here?
Yes, clearly the size of the savings, as you said, are enormous. Firstly, is there a plan B if your projected savings don't come to fruition? But more importantly, we've seen, haven't we, that some of those savings that were made under Boris were reversed by the Mayor caving in regarding ticket offices. How likely is it going to be going forward, because of the size of these savings, that they can be achieved without Londoners having to suffer a series of strikes?
I'm confident, and I'm confident for two reasons. One is that the Mayor has led a strategic dialogue with General Secretaries of the trade unions. Those meetings have been taking place. I've been in those meetings. And the whole nature of the relationship strategically with the trade unions is moving to a different place from where it is. So I can't claim that we will be without blips from time to time. I think that would be the wrong thing to say in front of you. You wouldn't believe me if I said it. But I do believe that having an effective mature, coherent set of dialogues and relationships with the trade union leaders and the representatives across the organisation is the right way to proceed. That's what a decent, modern organisation does. That's what an organisation such as ours, and I myself have a very strong embedded principle throughout my entire career of believing in good old-fashioned collective bargaining as a reasonable negotiating tool and a reasonable way to establish decent relationships at every level of the organisation. You also need the right management approach to ensure that managers are mature and equipped and trained and developed appropriately to deal with issues at source when they emerge, which they will from time to time in any large-scale organisation. And I'm very confident that we are building a different set of relationships than perhaps we've had for many, many years with our trade union colleagues. But we're not there yet. You don't change this overnight. There's no question about that. But we are determined to do so. I would just say on the staffing levels on the underground, actually, just to give you some idea of how we have to respond to increases in demand, every single month so far this financial year, with the exception of August, we have seen a record broken for the busiest month in history on London Underground. Some of our stations, in terms of the number of people going through them, are growing hugely on a daily basis. It would be inconceivable if I and my leadership team didn't respond to that by continually looking at adjusting the numbers of staff that we have in place. It also, by the way, would have been incredible, given the scale of change that we put in place on the station operating model, if we got it 100% right to start with. Indeed, I remember talking to this committee at some point and saying that it would be totally arrogant of me to assume that I would get it all right first time. So the changes that we're seeing with station staff are entirely the right thing to do for the safe, reliable and information flow perspective for those using our tube stations to ensure their continued safe and effective operation. I don't think...
come into more detail when we...
Yeah, sorry, but just because it was raised, yes, forgive me, Chair, sorry, but I just thought it was important to make the point, because in the context of, and by the way, in the context of the overall financial numbers, the reality is that is entirely with the savings that we still have seen from stations is entirely within the budget assumption envelopes that we put forward in our business plan.
So would you say then now, from I'm getting the impression from what you're saying, that the Mayor is now leading negotiations when it comes to industrial action?
No, absolutely not. The Mayor's made it very clear to me and to my team that he's, and indeed to the Trade Union General Secretary, he's not leading the negotiation. That would be entirely inappropriate, and I don't think he's any aspiration or intention to do that. I think what he's saying is, let's ensure there is proper strategic dialogue at every level across the Mayor and his team and his family, including people like me, with the General Secretaries of the Trade Union. But actually, let's also ensure that when we have the proper negotiation, the proper discussions at local level, that we're carrying that out in a spirit of trying to get to solution, trying to get issues resolved properly at source where they should be, rather than us always finding ourselves in an industrial strife position, because that doesn't actually help anybody. It doesn't help those who work on the system, and it doesn't help the leadership of the trade union, it doesn't help me. So I think that's all I'm saying.
So what is his function then?
Sorry?
What is his function then?
Well, the Mayor, as you know, is the Chair of Transport for London, but the Chair of Transport for London has never, in my experience, led the negotiation with the trade unions. That wouldn't be a function that the Chair of the Board would do.
But I just don't understand. You know, you're saying he's having all these meetings with the training.
Well, what I'm saying is these are strategic level contact meetings that just give the opportunity for the General Secretaries and the Mayor and myself, and the Deputy Mayor indeed is in the room as well, a chance for a strategic dialogue about what's happening. So, you know, we talk about the strategic issues going forward. At the last meeting, for example, we talked about the Mayor's transport strategy. So it's perfectly appropriate, I think, that you would want to do that with trade union colleagues.
Yeah. Could you just confirm, I do apologise, Jim. Could you just confirm that it is true that your office did send a letter to the Mayor confirming that it would be possible to freeze all fares if he wanted to?
Well, I think the Mayor's made it very clear that he's made it clear from the outset in his manifesto and since then that actually he has been committed to freezing those fares that TfL is responsible
I'm sorry, Mike.
for.
On this one, all I need to know from you is, can you confirm that there was correspondence between your office and the Mayor's office in relation to the Mayor's ability, if he so chose to do, to freeze all fares, including travel card fares.
Clearly, travel card fares and other fares where there's a national rail impact is a matter for much wider discussion with the national rail network and the operators, train operating companies, the rail delivery group and everybody else, and that's not where we are.
So we're of the impression, and we believe we've got evidence, that your office sent emails to the Mayor's office saying that he could, if he wanted to, freeze travel card fares. My question to you, very simply, do you have knowledge of that? Can you confirm that your office sent an email to the Mayor's office? I'm not saying to the Mayor himself.
I genuinely can't recall sending such an email. I mean, obviously, if you have it, I'm happy for you to share it with me and I'll have a look at it. I genuinely can't recall it. Genuinely.
Okay, right, we're going to move on to Tube. And just conscious members, it's 11:15 already. Got various issues on the Tube. We're going to bring, Keith's going to lead on the first bit, but I just wondered if you could just very briefly at the start, Mike, just update us what happened on the Northern Line yesterday, because that was quite unusual.
Yes,
problems.
so it was a very unusual problem. The Northern Line actually is, at the moment, the most reliable line on the Underground by some considerable distance. I think members of the committee will be aware of that. At 8:45 yesterday morning, there was a power supply failure which affected the signalling system at Kennington, which did result in the line being suspended between Moorgate to Stockwell and Charing Cross to Stockwell from both branches, and obviously caused serious disruption elsewhere on the line. It's a very unusual power failure, and I'm not a power engineer or a technical engineer, but I would say that it appeared that there was a power failure that created a particular problem with an isolated fuse that would not be the normal process that you would follow in your fault-finding processes. It's never happened before. We've never seen an issue like that emerge before with the power supply blip. So there's a standard process that you go into in terms of fault finding and diagnosis, and that was followed. Unfortunately, the reason it took a bit longer than it normally would in these situations was because the line of route that we eventually went down to discover it is not in the normal processes. Now, clearly, we're reviewing that as we speak. The team has, as recently as last night, updated me with what progress I've already made in identifying what the challenge was and how there could be a quick workaround put in place that bypassed that particular fuse and allowed safe operation as a result of that. But you'll be aware, Chair, the Northern Line is the busiest on the Tube network. Nearly 1 million people use it every day, so I'm very mindful of the disruption. Over the last 12 months, it's run on schedule over 99% of the time. If I may say, without sounding at all complacent, there aren't many railways in the country, although I'm sure members of the committee would wish, like I, that many of them did, that run anywhere close to that level of reliability. So we will get it back on track, and it will be back at those levels very soon, again, notwithstanding yesterday.
Thank you. Keith.
Okay. Thank you. We understand from the budget process, Mike, that TfL is pushing back a number of the tube capacity upgrade projects. Can you explain why these projects are being pushed back, please?
Well, they're not. It's a simple answer. It's simply not the case. I think the issue. So we have on the Circle District, Metropolitan, and Hammersmith City lines introduced new air-conditioned walk-through trains. The last of the old District Line trains are expected to be withdrawn next month. Already this has seen an increase in capacity of 10% on these routes, and work is well underway on the signalling upgrade, which will enable an increase in frequency to some 32 trains an hour, way above the current level of 26 or 27 in the central area. And the total peak time capacity across those lines, which account for some 45% of the network, will be 33% and will be delivered as soon as we can, but certainly at the very outset by 2022.
Could I, Mike, I appreciate this information. Could I be a little bit more specific? Yeah. I'm just a bit conscious of time, so I do apologise, Mike, I really do.
Yeah.
So in your, previously, we had some completion dates, so I'll just go through them. Piccadilly line, new generation trains and new signalling, 60% increase in capacity at peak, 33 trains per hour. That was originally expected to be completed in 2025. The completion date has now been pushed back to 26-27. Central Line capacity upgrade, 25% increase in capacity, 33 trains per hour. That was expected in 2030, it's now 33-34. Waterloo and City, track remodelling, 50% increase, 30 trains per hour. That was 2032. That's TBC, so that's under review, so we haven't actually got a new completion date for that one. Northern Line, bigger fleet, 30 trains per hour, 2022, now 23-24. Bakerloo Line capacity upgrade was 2033. That one, thankfully, has come forward. So, you know, let's give credit where it's due. That's now due 2028-29. But the other four are all being pushed back 2 or 3 or possibly even 4 years. And just want to explain, if you could just explain to us why that is the case.
So on the Piccadilly line, the new trains will be walked through. They will be air-cooled, first for deep-level tube lines. That's really exciting. The new trains will be introduced from 2023, and a new signalling control system will be in place by 2026. You can't actually put a new control system in place with the old trains because the nature of signalling, as you will understand, requires fit-out of the trains, because the signalling system is not any longer on these modern lines trackside. It's actually integral to the construction and development of the trains. So the Piccadilly line will be fully operating its new capacity, 60% increase in capacity by 2026. So I think, you know, if there's been some marginal changes on this line, this is just about the practical capability of the supply chain and the market to deliver this. This is not a funding constraint. Indeed, actually, I wouldn't want members of the committee, Chair, to be confused by the funding, the cash out the door against these projects, because actually what we are seeking to do as part, just going back to my answer to David earlier on, as part of our reconfiguration of how we work with our contractors, we are actually flowing money in a much more commercially appropriate way than we might have done before. So historically, we would have paid up front for new trains. Now we're paying for them on delivery of a reliable working train. We would have paid up front a huge amount for the development, installation and commissioning of a signalling system. Now we're paying for most of it when it is proven to work and is delivering the requirements of upgrades. So the cost profile is very helpful here. In terms of the slight differences in terms of delivery schedule, that is simply to ensure the technical marrying up of the signalling and the trains. But the important thing is getting these lines upgraded, getting them delivered to the timeline that is needed for to support the growth of London and support the reliability improvements that they will deliver. We will see the Victoria line this year, 22nd of May, going up to 36 trains an hour in each direction. You know, railways in the world, even those in Asia Pacific, who are seen as the best in the world, don't come close to those levels of frequency, and it's needed, and we'll keep going.
Are you able to give us an update on the Waterloo and City line? When
Yeah, the Waterloo and City line will almost certainly. The reason it's a bit to be announced is just we're not clear whether we'll do it at the front end of the Central Line work or at the back end of the work yet. We're still working that through because actually it's the same trains and fundamentally the same process as the Central Line. So we've just got to work out what is the best and most effective way of doing that. The Bakerloo line has some other opportunities, of course, because with the proposed extension of the Bakerloo line, you'd want to make sure it was coincident with the construction of the southern extension, because for that you will need more trains anyway, and you wouldn't want to plug in some new trains in a half-baked way, sort of plugging on a new signalling system to an existing one, because you wouldn't get the full benefit of that line's upgrade.
Okay, thank you.
Oh
yes, I do. Sorry, I'm so excited about that. Is the Metropolitan line extension, is that expected to go ahead then? And if so, how do we know how it's going to be paid for?
I'm sorry, I missed the second part of that.
How is it going to be paid for?
So, so since we've inherited the Metropolitan Line Extension project under a mayoral direction from the previous mayor, obviously we've been getting a grip of the true cost, and we continue to work on what that true cost would be. There are some challenges. Clearly, this is a project that could be funded from the Growth Fund, which totals, as you know, in the business plan, some 550 million, of which 200 million is unallocated as we speak. So, you know, this is something that we continue to work on. We will continue to look at going forward, and you know, we'll obviously keep the committee informed.
Is the Bakerloo Extension Fund coming out of that 200 million as well?
No, the Bakerloo line extension is different, and we are looking at funding models, including the potential for London, that's for land value capture, to ensure that we look at what we might do to ensure a different model for funding for the big schemes, including the Bakerloo line extension, Crossrail 2 indeed, to ensure that we properly, in hopefully a more devolved fiscal environment, are able to fund schemes in that way.
Right. And you say, if I heard you right, then you're saying the Metropolitan line extension's 50 million, that's coming out the 200 million?
Well, what I said was that there is 200 million of the growth fund monies at the moment unallocated. Clearly there are other projects, and I know the gentleman to your left might mention Sutton extension of the trams network. I would be very disappointed if he didn't indeed. So there are other schemes that potentially play on the same pot of money. So clearly one of the things we've got to do is look and see what is the right priority for spend of that across the city.
Okay, I've got.
Should we bring Steve in just
Yeah,
on the
go on.
Thank you. That's quite timely, because this 200 million growth fund is an interesting subject. It's to misquote. It's trying to get a quart out of a pint pot. You've already, because in my questions to the mayor and to the deputy mayor about the removal of the £100 million for the Sutton tram, I was cheerfully responded to by saying, well, we can look at the growth fund of 200 million. You appear to have spent most of that on underground upgrades, right? Can you explain this rather interesting illusion of this £200 million growth fund?
Well, all I was saying was it is a pot that is available to be accessed for a number of schemes. Clearly, you're right, you can't access them all from that scheme. What I would say on Sutton and on the tram potential extension, I had a very positive meeting alongside the Deputy Mayor and with Sutton Council, with the leader and with her officials, and we agreed a reinvigorated piece of work to look at options around the existing commitment that the borough has made to identify whether the 46 million I think they've got already in track for that, whether that could be increased, how it might be increased. So looking at exploring changes, some changes to the route, revisiting the development assumptions about the number of homes that could be enabled by the scheme, because that would clearly deliver more contribution to the funding, a higher contribution to the funding. Again, looking at alternative funding schemes such as land value capture mechanisms, which I've looked at before, and which was, the report that you would have seen from the London Finance Commission was very favourable on all of that. And identifying costs that would be avoided if the tram extension was delivered. So, for example, reduced traffic congestion that may postpone or remove the need for some highway or junction improvements. So what we've done is we've agreed, the Deputy Mayor and myself with the leader of the council agreed to have another very fresh look at this. That collaborative work, which I think is in the right spirit of trying to get to solution, not trying to look at problems, that will conclude in April, at which time there will be a clearer view as to what funding model might exist for such an extension going forward. But as well as meeting with the borough when I was down there, Steve, I had a very useful tour around. I saw the site, I saw the hospital development area, I saw all the potential on the Brighton Road and what can be offered there. So, it was a very exciting prospect. We just need to work out the mechanics of how we might do it.
I hope it can excite your finances. Obviously tonight we are in Sutton, many of us, and this will be exercise. But my last point, we talked about earlier trying to get people out of cars,
yes,
which is a virtuous aim. Yeah. And if you can get people out of cars in southwest London rather than drive around to Wimbledon and Sutton, surely that must match the mayor's aspirations. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
we know more people will get out of a car and go onto a tram than they will onto a bus.
Indeed, so.
Evidence before. One more question from you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is about the Barking Gospel Oak London Overground. I know some of the answers to the question, but I think it's good to put it in the public domain. Could you explain why there has been the delay in the electrification? But secondly, what I would also like to ask, my understanding is that hasn't been fully completed, although the line is now reopened, thankfully. Can we have your guarantee that there will be the least level of disruption whilst Network Rail do what they should have done? And finally, there is a sort of an indication through this that there may have been a bit of a failing, really, in your team's management to allow the project to to overrun so badly?
Well, first of all, let me take up that last question first. This is not our project. This is Network Rail's track. This is Network Rail's project. It's their railway, and it's their job to electrify it. And there is no question that when we had regular updates from Network Rail throughout all the time of the project, right up until the end of January, we were given assurances that this project was fully on track and on target. It is absolutely inconceivable that I would apply my own project team to manage somebody else's railway upgrade project. To do so would add huge cost to my business, would do all the things that you would quite rightly as a committee be challenging me on in terms of duplication, over scrutiny of somebody else's work, and it would be totally inappropriate and absolutely unprecedented for any railway to do to another railway in this situation. This is a Network Rail project. It's their failing. They didn't deliver. That's the fact.
So just on that then, Mike, are you going to get some compensation or something?
Absolutely, and they have committed. I've had commitment from the chair and from the chief exec. We will absolutely get the right compensation, and passengers will also get whatever compensation is due to ensure they are not out of pocket or inconvenienced financially.
Even if they're pay-as-you-go customers?
By this phase, we will absolutely work out the detailed mechanics of that. But Keith, to be clear, I've been absolutely all over this with both the chair of Network Rail and his chief executive to ensure we get the right level of compensation. They have held their hands up. I have a letter in my pack in front of me from their infrastructure project director overall, managing director overall in Network Rail, who has also reiterated that point precisely.
So we can tell the people of London, or certainly from my manor, that they will be compensated.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Fantastic. That's great news.
And in terms of convenience, inconvenience going forward. So what we're doing at the moment is holding Network Rail, their feet to the fire in terms of what additional work is actually required now to complete this project, how we can do that with as little disruption as possible going forward. Clearly, the railway did reopen last week, but with still some outstanding work to be done. And I am, and the failures they had on design and procurement problems, further closure that will be needed, you can rest assured we will be pushing them absolutely to ensure that is to the minimum, that the, again, parallel point to the one that Joanne made earlier on about street works, we will absolutely be poring all over them to see the detail of their plan in terms of how effectively they're using any closure weekend. I'm not having closure weekends or closure days applied to us without the proper level of scrutiny to ensure that every single minute that they have that railway closed, that they're absolutely working flat out to deliver it.
So when you know that, can you let us know?
We absolutely,
so I can let
we absolutely will. And I said the only reason I can't let you know now is because literally as I speak, that work is being worked through with their team.
Okay, so
Just to be clear though, TfL Network Rail were doing this work for TfL so that you could operate electric trains.
Well, the TfL were doing this work. Of course, that was one of the benefits of this work. But let me be clear: this railway is not just used by our trains. This is also used by freight trains. Potentially, they could be electric in the future. So this is a Network Rail piece of infrastructure. Now, you could argue I would far rather have an integrated railway where I had full control over, as I do with the underground or the DLR. I don't. And as soon as I do, then I'll have a project team to manage it appropriately.
Okay. Tom, you wanted to come in quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted a bit of clarity on the Northern Line upgrades, because of this issue about the deferral of it. And so according to our briefing, the TfL board were advised in February 2016 that the Northern Line upgrade should not be deferred. If the project could not be completed to time, that it should be cancelled because the value in going ahead will be less the later it's completed. And despite the advice, TfL has decided to defer the Northern Line upgrade. So why are they going against that advice?
Well, so let me just be clear what we're talking about here. So the Northern Line, of course, has already had an upgrade. This is the second phase of upgrade. So you can do some additional work with the...
So the signalling's been upgraded already?
Yes. So that you can do some additional work with the Battersea extension, of course, because that allows a separation at Kennington. I mean, although you still retains the crossover route, but predominantly the line of route is intended to be from Battersea Power Station through Nine Elms, Kennington, up the Charing Cross branch. The major capacity benefit you get ultimately from the Northern Line is with the work at Camden, where we
Yes.
put in the planning application, as you know, where you, because
Yes,
Camden, you know, is totally unfit for purpose,
Yep.
as you know, for
Absolutely.
certainly for level access interchange between the two branches there. So the capacity, what I would say is I think we will still see some more incremental capacity improvements going forward. Committee members will be aware, I'm sure, that so rather than a big bang, we will see continued work happening with Northern Line, because unlike the rest of the Northern Line fleets, there is still a different arrangement in place for the ownership and management of the Northern Line trains.
Is that going back to the PPP?
That's
days?
actually before that, predates that.
Predates
That was
that.
in the mid-90s, the PFI.
Yeah.
It was the first PFI we had to purchase the original Northern Line trains. So what we are in ongoing dialogue with Alstom, who provide the trains, is what additional enhanced availability of those trains they can deliver. So the signalling system is already capable of delivering more service. It's just how we can get more trains available most quickly. So that's what we're working on. So the reason for the slight differences in dates and the discussion around that is simply to ensure that both for the Northern Line and indeed the Jubilee Line, we push as much as we can to get the availability of the existing fleet up, while recognising that we're probably going to need some more trains as well, ultimately.
But there's going to be an increased cost, though, overall from the
Yeah,
deferral.
well, there'll be more. If you have to buy more trains, you obviously have to pay
Yeah.
for them. I mean, the advantage is that in terms of production run with any supplier, the Northern Line and the Jubilee Line trains are remarkably similar. There
Yeah.
are some technical differences, but the signalling system's the same, and therefore the design of the train would be pretty similar.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you for that. Let's move on to Night Tube. Navin.
Thank you. Mike, I have figures here up till 12th of January this year, which show that altogether there were 119 complaints about noise and vibrations, and this includes surface level and tube stations. We have figures for Northern and Central Line, but there's absolutely nothing about Jubilee Line, which serves my constituency. If you have figures now, please let us have. If not, if you can let us have them later on, please.
Yes, I'm not sure if I have the breakdown in that way now.
And I'll be pleasantly surprised if there aren't any complaints
well, I would certainly
on Jubilee Line.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say to you that you know we just on. I'm very mindful of this as being a very important issue. We prioritise mitigation, obviously based on the level of noise recorded in people's homes, as well as our own information about track condition. We've installed some 5,000 shock absorbent track fastenings, and therefore seen quite a lot of reduction in noise in homes as far-reaching as in Pimlico, Notting Hill, Baker Street, Wanstead, Bethnal Green, Warren Street and Vauxhall. Further installations are in progress, and more is planned going forward. There's also some work we're doing on reducing airborne noise. That's more challenging. There's fewer practical mitigations exist, but we are looking at new technologies. For example, something called rail damping on the Central Line, without getting too technical. Now, I'm sure you would understand it possibly better than me. I would say that's about putting a porous membrane fitted to the base of the rail that actually absorbs noise before it goes into the atmosphere. So we're exploring all of these, but I will certainly, Chair, ensure that the committee and you, Navin, get the detail on the lines that you raise.
The measures include stuff like triple glazing or anything directly to the complainants' properties where there are major issues.
Well, that's not in our plan.
Surface.
Yeah, that's not in our plan at the moment, but I do know that we have, we continue to respond to both you and indeed, Chair, yourself. I know you've written to us with particular complaints in Barbican, South Wimbledon, Chiswick Park, other places that we've been talked to. We've met with Keith previously on complaints in the Woodford area in August and September. And so, the 159 complaints we've had overall, which is what we've had overall on night tube noise, we continue to work on every single complaint. We have a dedicated team to do this. It's not our intention at the moment to do any work with individual homes, because I'm convinced that we can do the right level of mitigation on the railway itself.
Do you have, obviously there's a sense of urgency which you will appreciate to get these things sorted. Do you have any particular timescales for completing the plant noise and vibration?
Well, it is a very
works?
detailed plan, so I think on the basis of time, Chair, I mean, I could go into every specific action that is there, and there are a huge number of actions, but again, I'd be more than happy to share that, or Mark Wilde or one of his team could take the committee through that in detail, either as a smaller group or individually, if that was appropriate.
And how are you engaging with local residents when they lodge these complaints?
So every complaint that's lodged, we follow up with the individuals concerned. As I say, this is a different level of mitigation that we put, a different level of response we put in place specifically for Night Tube. We have a phone number, 0343 222 1234, or our website, which will guarantee a swift and personal response. That's our intention. If that's not happening in any cases, then I'll be happy to take up the cases personally. But you know, we are working very, very hard to ensure that any individual or more general complaints that are raised, we tackle absolutely rigorously with an appropriate plan.
How quickly are they replied to when you get complaints? And also, if I can ask you at the same time, has the rate of complaints dropped over the period?
I think it varies on the second point. So some have risen slightly, some have dropped more, some we've understood why they've raised and we've put in the appropriate actions to reduce them down again. I would say in terms of the speed of response, well, we aim to actually get back to people very quickly. That's why we've got this dedicated team. I mean, this is resourced in a totally different way from what we've done before. Indeed, one of my colleagues in the underground team who runs it is sitting in the audience here now, and I'm sure we'll be taking away the actions to respond to you on the detail now. Yeah. But I can really assure you, I'm very, very mindful of the disturbance that people feel that the Night Tube operation is having on their sleeping patterns and everything else, and I take that extremely seriously, which is why we did set up a dedicated team and why Mark Wilde in the underground and his people, his engineers, are all over it.
Are there any financial constraints
No.
in implementing
No.
the necessary remedial works?
No, the only constraint there occasionally is some of the technical challenges. There's parts of the railway where actually you have to go down and physically hand grind, which is sort of like but it literally is that. It's grinding the rails by hand, because actually some of the gauging on the underground is very complex for big grinding machinery to get in there. So that's the only constraint, but it's not a financial one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before I bring Joanne in, can I just welcome students from Deptford Park Primary School in Lewisham. Welcome to City Hall. This is the Transport Committee of the London Assembly, and we're asking some questions about different modes of transport. We're looking at the Tube at the moment, and this is the Commissioner for Transport for London who's in charge of transport in the capital. So, Joanne, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I want to come in about follow-up following complaints. I'm talking particularly about the Seven Sisters area with the Victoria line. At the end of November, I arranged a public meeting for a number of residents, and your officers came and said that they were very good at the meeting, so thank you for that. There were a couple of things that became apparent. One is that the level of complaints your officers actually said you had were about 4 or 5. I had more people in the room that all said they had complained to TfL, so I think there's an issue about how you're collecting those figures and whether they get lost in the system somewhere. But secondly, we were told that we would get track grinding in the area in March. And I drew up a list of actions that were agreed upon following that meeting. We had one email from TfL following about the week later, but since then nothing at all.
Right.
And I did pass on all the emails for the people that were there to TfL, and it just seems to me that, and I've had complaints from residents very recently saying we still don't know what's going on, are we getting the track grinding in March? It just seems that if you get complaints on a area basis, it seems to me that you should be sophisticated enough not to wait for individual complaints to come back in, but to regularly email out to those people if there is some work going on in the area, so they don't have to keep writing back to you on an individual basis.
I absolutely agree, and we'll get back to you and the residents immediately as to what's happening, given we're now in March. So I absolutely agree, and I also will take the point about the number of complaints in reality as opposed to whether any are slipping through, and we'll have another review of that. I'll personally make sure I have a look at that. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nathan, you said you had a little one before we move on.
Chair, if you'll allow me to indulge whilst the questions are about noise, if I can ask whilst we have this opportunity to the Commissioner on staffing issues. do you have any particular staffing issues both with the current service and what is in the pipeline, including any overtime issues?
On the underground?
You mean night,
for the night
do you mean
service,
night tube?
related to night service?
Related to night service? No, we have the right number of staff in place to operate the night service. It's been operating well. The numbers keep growing. You know, we're absolutely confident we have the right process in place. Clearly, there are some local discussions going on at the moment about the deployment of some night drivers and those who have an aspiration to work full-time, but we're working that through in the normal course of our discussions with our trade union colleagues.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we've got 3 sections to go. It's already 11:45. Joanne, you're doing tube station staffing, which has been touched on a little bit today. But
Yes, Mike, you've already touched on the fact that there was an independent review into level of staffing at stations and you've put more staff back in place. I think under the previous mayor, 800 numbers of staff were reduced. Could you just briefly go through exactly how many of those staff are being put back? Because we're not quite sure whether it's relating to your normal turnover, whether it's additional staff, and also whether they're full-time or part-time.
Okay, so we do think, as I've said earlier on, that more staff are needed in stations because of the volume of people using our services. So we're recruiting at least 650 new staff this year. 325 of those will be additional roles over and above where we are, and we've already started recruiting the first 200 of those. So we're already in place. The remainder of those new staff will comprise a mix of supervisory roles and customer service assistant frontline roles, and are expected to be a mix of full and part-time. Now, the reason I can't give you all of the detailed answer to those numbers, Joanne, is because obviously the review that we're having station by station and looking at where the requirements are most needed is part of that. And I don't want to preempt the outcome of that, other than to say we are ensuring we apply a consistent model across the network, and that we end up with the right answer, which I'm confident we will. But the really important thing is that we've got those recruitment processes underway, and we're on track.
It may be that we would need you to write with us with some further details, because I'm not sure we can get to the exact detail here. But you said that the 325 new roles are from where we are now.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you've got a high vacancy rate, that means something very different from 2 or 3 months ago or 2 or 3 months ahead. So I think some further detail.
Yes, well that's why there's a difference between the 325 new roles and the 650 new staff in total, because the new staff in total are obviously included the new ones, but also those who are filling vacancies and the natural sort of turnover that you get.
But I'm assuming you have a target headcount you want.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean,
so that might be useful way to describe it to us.
Yes, we have an assumption, but again, there is obviously the appropriate flexibility, because as I said earlier on in the discussion with Keith, I want to make sure that we are staffed appropriately for what is required on every station, and clearly ensuring stations are open, ensuring stations are properly staffed, for example, for the availability, very importantly, of accessibility lifts, for example, is really, and also that the turn up and go philosophy that we apply and that we're very proud of is able to be executed appropriately on every single station on our network.
Okay, and obviously the issue of staffing was reason for some of the recent industrial action. Can I ask what sort of guarantee do you have from the unions that if you put this in place that will solve that issue, or is there a review process built in?
Well, I'm very confident that we've got this resolved, and we've had the right level of dialogue with the unions to get this resolved. They're working very closely with us, and I think the fact that they not only suspended all their industrial action, but they also called off their overtime constraints that they'd had in place as well, I think it references that, so I'm very confident.
And when these new rules are in place, do you intend to review that periodically as well?
Absolutely, and it goes back to what I said earlier on. It would be inconceivable that we don't have almost a continual review of staffing levels. You know, if you get a new development, so I was still talking about Black Horse Road earlier on, that may be a relatively small development, but actually if you get 350 new homes, maybe 500, 600 people potentially living there, maybe more, who are using the tube on a daily basis, you clearly want to ensure that you have the right level of support for that station to ensure its continued safe and reliable operation.
Okay. And of course, the review from Travel Watch also had other recommendations about staff being available, changes to uniform, a focal point in a station and so forth. Perhaps you can't tell me now, but perhaps you could write and let us know how you're doing with all of those particular issues.
Well, certainly. I mean, just on the focal point trials, we've already got 13 different stations where we're trialling that across the network. I can let you know the detail of those in terms of focal points, but also staff visibility and availability. So things like red, high visibility gilets, as they're called, for staff in the ticket hall area, greater signage around information zones, more visible information zones, an increased staff presence at those information zones, looking at what we can do for customer usage at help points, how we can ensure there's a quick and rapid response to that, and also making sure that the effective use of our people as they have iPads around the station is to the best benefit of the passengers. So there's a lot going on. We've got local action plans in place at the 21 least well-performing stations as a priority to get them improved further. So a lot is going on, as well as I've said, a review of the Turn Up and Go service, looking at how we can provide a better service there as well. But I'm more than happy to write with you with the detail of our programme. We have a detailed plan on all the Travel Watch recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to look at the bus network. Florence.
Thank you, Chair. We've touched on traffic congestion and also TfL budgets, and buses play a key role in this in terms of some of our buses aren't moving, and we have seen a decrease in terms of some of that revenue. And obviously there's a really ambitious target of increasing that forecast of 11% in bus passengers and 20% increase in revenue from buses. This is dependent on if we have a good functioning bus network across London. I know that there's a plan at the moment and a big review of the bus network. What changes do you expect to see on the back of that review?
Well, first of all, I know that the committee is looking in detail at the bus service in London, and I really do look forward to seeing your report in due course. I think that will be very helpful in helping frame some of our thinking. So thank you for the work you're doing there. Obviously, as you imply, Florence, getting the bus network right is an imperative. That we have seen huge growth since 2000, some 60% since 2000, but it is true that since 2015 we have seen a decline in demand. There's interesting factors around that. One is, of course, I've no doubt bus speeds and related to the discussion on congestion earlier on, but also there is some evidence actually emerging that the detailed granularity of the information available to people is actually driving some behaviours as well. So historically, people would arrive at a bus stop, they might not get any more information than saying there's a bus every 3 to 5 minutes, and you or I might just hang around thinking, well, the most I'm going to have to wait is 5 minutes. It could be 3, it could be 1, whatever, I'm not very sure. Now, of course, we've all got the apps, we all know exactly what's happening, and people are making more informed choices, therefore there is some evidence about what they do. Now, that's good, because some of those choices involve walking, for example, so that's a positive to some extent, although, of course, as ever, I have multiple hats on this. It's positive from that perspective, not always good for getting volume of people on the buses. But we do aim to recover the network performance through this greater journey time reliability, as we call it. Includes a bus priority programme, 200 million for bus priority measures to improve this, focusing on the central London grid, if you like, so focusing on those with the highest patronage of travellers and those that deliver some of the greatest opportunities for improving journey time. Also looking at radial corridors where some of the highest concentration of usage are on multiple overlapping routes, as well as 11 of the 12 low emission bus zones as well. Outer London reliability schemes generally, where again there is the greatest potential for shifting people away from their car onto buses, which is very important, of course, as well. And again, going back to my point earlier on, growth schemes which are there to facilitate new housing and economic development areas as well. So, I think there's a lot of work going on. As I've said before, I think to this committee, and I've no doubt my bus team would have said as well, that the service frequency of some of the routes that cross through central London is a direct result of the frequency required in suburban areas, rather than necessarily the frequency required in those core central London areas where many bus routes come together. Of course, the great thing about the bus hopper, which the Mayor has put in place with our support, for some 30 million hopper journeys have now been made. This, of course, gives people the opportunity to more seamlessly change between routes to pick up some of the realities that you see in terms of what's required within the central London areas. So I think there is a lot going on. You know, the low emission bus zones are very important. Putney, High Street in the next few weeks is the first one. Brixton to Streatham in October, and then we've got 12 in total, 10 more to follow after that. These will make real differences to local neighbourhoods, local communities, and is all part of what we're doing as well. So real challenges ahead. I don't want to underplay that, but I think some genuine opportunities to improve the service, to modernise the service, but equally to ensure we properly support local communities and commuters across the city.
And I think on that point of local communities and commuters, one of the feedback we received from some of the boroughs was in terms of some of the planning. They felt that TfL weren't engaging with them enough in terms of redesigning some of those routes. We know that the consultation on some of the routes going through Oxford Circus is live at the moment. And we also know that there isn't going to be an increase in the bus kilometres. And Val's confirmed that. Leon Daniels also confirmed that with us. So in terms of that service volume. And I think, again, that's one of the things that the bus operators mentioned to us when we met with them 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that, we are, when we're looking at this whole scale review of that, we are touching base and in discussion with all those different stakeholders to make sure we get this right. Because I think the reality is there are still a number of bus hotspots across London. And obviously Elephant Castle sticks out for me, where I describe that as a bus garage without a bus garage. So, making sure we get some of those routes right to help increase the reliability and to get that crucial income for TfL.
Absolutely, and I think, in terms of the engagement, we will try harder. I mean, we have to continue to try harder, and we will. You have my absolute commitment. We'll take that away and make sure we do better at that where we can. I think the other thing, you did mention bus operators, and I should just say, actually, I have had some high-level discussions with some of the owning groups of the bus operators in recent weeks, and we increasingly want to mobilise their input and their advice. They're the eyes and ears of the network out there on the streets every day. Historically, they've almost just been, I don't mean this in any way insulting, it's the way the contractual mechanism works, a little bit of a sort of dumb deliverer of the service that we ask them to deliver. Actually, I quite value their input as to what more things we might look at from their perspective, and I don't think we've potentially used their skills and their brain power to help craft this before. And after all, they do run buses, many of them, across the whole country, and it would be good to just make sure that we're properly tapping into their skills and their talents.
Right, no, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So let's just final area, quickly look at Heathrow expansion. Tom.
Very much, Chair. What further discussions has TfL had with Department for Transport or Heathrow Airport about the surface transport schemes that will be required for an expanded airport?
So we're invited, Tom, to respond to the airport's national policy statement as a consultee, and we're currently drafting our response, which we'll share obviously with the TfL board going forward. We don't sit on the working group, whether I guess that's while there is a possibility of a judicial review process emerging. We do meet the department on this, but obviously it's disappointing, frankly, for us not to be part of this group, because we have a pretty strong view of what is required from a public transport perspective, as you know, for Heathrow as is, and certainly for an expanded Heathrow.
Absolutely. Do you think that after the judicial review you might go onto the Transport Working Group? Is this entirely at the discretion of the DfT, I assume?
It seems to be, and I would hope we would. I think we can add and contribute significantly to the discussion, so I would hope we would.
Good. Do you consider that Southern Rail access to be required from the day that the third runway opens? Do you think that's essential?
Yes, I do, but it has to be actually a credible version of Southern Rail. I mean, clearly some of the schemes that we've seen before would absolutely create chaos, not least for the bus network and indeed the cycling network in parts of South and West London, which we want to avoid. So I want a credible version of that with new capacity, new connectivity. If we can achieve the aspirations we want to, of course, for no new road trips to be in place. The Airports Commission indeed made clear that Southern Rail access was required for an expanded Heathrow. So, as I said, at the moment, I'm slightly disappointed. There seems to be a little bit of a rowing back from the government on this specific issue. So we're certainly of the view that it's required, as indeed probably is Western access, although that's beyond London, clearly.
I mean, you mentioned no increase in traffic. I mean, I think one of the most striking things that came out of our investigation recently on this was, although they're saying no new cars on the road, there'll be a projected 80% increase in freight traffic. Yeah. How can this be mitigated?
Well, I mean, clearly that would have a massive impact on the already congested road network, consequences for journey times, for airport, non-airport journey, and most importantly for air quality. And also a particular concern for local roads, which are totally ill-suited for this increased proliferation that you get from HGV traffic. So, I would just say I think it's worrying, unless there's something going on that I don't know about, that the government or the airport don't seem to be taking urgent steps to have a firm look at this.
No, they're not, and it seems it's something they want to sort of brush under the carpet or kick into the long grass rather than actually dealing with. They don't seem to have any answers to where that traffic is going to go.
No, and I think that there are so many questions still to be answered on this proposed expansion. There's a long way to go.
Okay.
There was a debate in Parliament this week where this was raised with a number of local MPs, and Freight, Sarah Olney, kept pushing, and they really didn't answer, and they said they'll put something in writing, so I presume that correspondence will be in public. But I think we will need to follow that up.
We will.
Lovely. That comes to the end, Mike, of our questions this morning. So thank you very much indeed for your time. For 2 hours you've been answering questions non-stop, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
We're now going to move on to some items with Travel Watch. So you'll feel free to leave, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much. Chair, I wonder if I may, just with your indulgence, because Steve actually wasn't in the chamber when I did at the onset of the discussion, Steve, I did refer, first of all, the Chair kindly allowed me to say a few words where I referred to the tragic accident in Croydon, and I did wish to place on record my personal thanks to you as well as to others locally for all the support you gave at that time. So forgive me, Chair, for just re-emphasising that point. Now that Steve's in
thank you for the support that you delivered as well.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So can we note the discussion we've had with the Commissioner? Yep. And let's just let officers move the nameplates around, as we've got 4 different items relating to Travel Watch. Can we move then to item 10 whilst officers are doing that? And this is our work programme. Can we agree our work programme for the remainder of 2016-17? And note the letter from the Department of Transport on surface access to Heathrow.
Agreed.
Lovely, thank you. And date of our next meeting is Wednesday the 19th of April, and it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the chamber. I'm not sure I even knew it was 2 o'clock, it says there. I presume it's in my diary. I knew it was on that date. I always assume it's 10 o'clock, so 2 o'clock, members, for that. I think we've already, just from our initial discussion on cycling, walking, healthy streets this morning, already got a few things. And we will add in bridges as well, Tom, to that.
Add in bridges. Excellent.
Yes, I think I mentioned Royal Hyde, Canary Wharf, but Garden Bridge.
Those 2 points, what criteria they used to assess and who made the assessment.
So we'll pick that up as well. Lovely. And Mark, are you joining? Lovely. Very good. So, members, we have got 4 items on Travel Watch to go through. So welcome Stephen Locke, the Chair of London Travel Watch, and Janet Cook, the Chief Executive of London Travel Watch, and obviously Mark Roberts, our Executive Director of Secretariat, who helps oversee our relationship with Travel Watch. Thank you for coming along. I know you've been sitting in our discussion earlier. First of all, we've got your performance monitoring report. Obviously, we've read it. Are there any 2 or 3 sentences you want to add, just highlighting any key things for us before we do questions?
Not particularly, Chair. I mean, this is our 6-monthly interim report against the business plan, which was previously approved by the Assembly. I think you'll see in there a mixture of clear and gratifying results and of things that are slower burn, longer term issues where we have to keep plugging away. And it was certainly gratifying to hear Mike Brown earlier talking about, for example, rail access to Heathrow, which is something we have pushed from very early on. But there are plenty of other longer-term challenges on the horizon, which I think are described and referred to in the report.
Okay, thank you. Keith, I think you had some questions, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning. First of all, what changes to transport interchanges do you expect TfL to make in light of your recommendations?
Which changes do you expect TfL to make?
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole series. I mean, the whole point about interchanges, there's a whole series of things that transport operators and providers can do, ranging from very small things to very large things, cost-wise, that make a significant difference to the user experience, improve things, but also help the operators to run the system more effectively. So we're talking with TfL about the things they might do. So on an ongoing basis, we talk about small things that they might do progressively at different stations, but also some of the bigger aspirations we've got is to look again at, for example, the interchange arrangements at Brixton and around Lewisham, where there's actually opportunities to improve customer service, but also actually help the system work. So it's those kind of things, Keith, that we're hopeful of, but we have to keep plugging away on the long term.
Right.
We had very useful input from Mark Wild at the last of our interchange seminars, and he was certainly responding very positively to input, for example, from a representative of the sight-impaired community to issues which could make the use of interchanges very much easier. It's important to remember, though, that this is a multidisciplinary, multi-party exercise, because it's not just TfL who have interchange responsibilities. It also applies to Network Rail, to the train operating companies, local councils, and indeed a number of other participants.
Okay, thank you. And have you got any specific recommendations in relation to improvements on cycling safety?
Cycling safety?
Sorry, I can't hear. It must be where I'm sitting. I can't quite hear
Probably
you,
me.
actually.
I must be mumbling. I'll
No, it's probably me.
The
But
microphone probably not. Oh, sorry.
We have contact. What specific improvements on cycling safety are you proposing in your report?
we're not proposing as such. What we're trying to do is better understand the implication of the statistics and what might be improvements that would actually improve cycle safety. So we're trying to better understand what this means, because, as you know very, very well, it's sort of, it's the sort of infrastructure you deliver, how you manage that, how you maintain it, but also the opportunities that there are to improve things, just in terms of, left-hand turns and all the rest of it. So the whole raft of things, we're trying to better understand the statistics behind the cycling injuries and fatalities, so that we can actually have the appropriate discussions with TfL and the boroughs as necessary.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you have the financial performance table that was supplied to us. It's on page 78 of the agenda, if that's helpful. Yeah. I've got a query under the income heading. It says original budget was 517,650. And then it says the revised budget was 518,000. And then it says actual spent income to date 516,000. And then variance against budget, in brackets, you've got 2,000. Can you explain what's happening there?
I imagine that's just cash flow. The income from the Greater London Authority we get in tranches every 2 weeks through the year. Occasionally there might be a slight hiccup. I mean, it comes regularly, but from time... So I imagine that's just what that represents, Keith. The latest cash flow figures I looked at, all the GLA income was coming in and right up to date. So I think it probably just reflected the position.
What sprung to my mind is transport focused cost recovery.
Mm-hmm.
That's £2,000. Yeah. And that's a positive, and the other one's a negative, or the other way around. I just wonder if there's any correlation between those two figures.
Coincidence?
I think it's coincidence and rounding.
The transport focus cost recovery is payment by transport focus for the staff time that we provide on safety issues, because we have one safety officer who is effectively shared between the two organisations.
So it's half a day a week that they reimburse us.
But you can't
I
explain
think the
but you can't explain the £2,000 in brackets then.
No, I could get, I mean, this is obviously at the half year. I could get someone to look at the detail of that, but there was nothing there that flagged up as a...
I think this is just, as Janet said, this is going to be roundings and sort of timing of the payment, because we do have a regular payment which goes to Travel Watch from here. But I will go and check whether there is anything.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
At the end of the year, it comes out of the budget figure. Otherwise, Janet would tell me.
Oh, trust me, yes.
Right, I've got one final question, and this is also budget related. You've indicated that you're having an increase in workload. Have you done anything to, or are you going to do anything to mitigate the risks highlighted by you about not having enough staff to deal with that increased workload?
That's particularly on casework, I think.
Yes.
Well, we just constantly review the situation. We've got a very small staff team, and whenever there's a vacancy or wherever we've got a particular pressure point, we do look again if there's different ways that we can do things. And obviously, with technology and that, we are looking at continuous improvement. I mean, which for us means very small things. So we just keep regularly looking at that. We're in the midst of an exercise at the moment because we've got maternity leave replacement coming up, of actually seeing different ways that we can push the work into different places. So yeah, because that's critical for us, that we've actually got that we're deploying our staffing resources as best we can to actually deal with the work that's coming in, because we do recognise there's unlikely to be an increase in them.
Right. We're going to cover some other stuff later. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other members? No. So on that report, can we note the financial outturn position of London Travel Watch as at 30th of September and note the performance of London Travel Watch against its agreed objectives?
Agreed.
Agreed. Lovely, thank you. And Janet and Stephen, you've agreed to stay for our other items. So the next one is actually quite a big item on the Rail Passengers Redress Scheme, which is a government-led initiative which would create a new final arbitration body for passenger complaints, a kind of third binding stage. Janet, Stephen, did you have anything, or Mark, that you wanted to add on this?
Just add that this is something which has been pushed really hard by the Rail Minister, Paul Maynard, who was keen on it from the moment he arrived in the job. We've had very good and productive discussions with him, and he has secured the backing of the train operating companies through the Rail Development Group, who are committed to paying for the scheme. We're also working closely with Transport Focus, who are affected by this in much the same way, working in parallel with us. Essentially what you have is a self-regulatory solution for the delivery of actual redress to passengers, the actual decisions on redress, which goes well beyond what we're able to provide through the kind of complaint handling appeals and the mediation that we currently do. So it's potentially a major benefit for passengers, and one which we think can be dovetailed quite cleverly into the current arrangements which we have and Transport Focus have, and which we are obliged to carry out under statute.
Okay, Joanne, I think you had some questions on this.
I too think it's could be a good scheme. My only concern is what effect it has on you. So I want to ask some questions, if I can. Just looking at the paper, I'm not still clear. Who would actually run the service?
The adjudication
Yes.
part of the service would be an outsourced provider.
And this is be under a company limited by guarantee.
The proposal is that there's a company set up limited by guarantee, and we're taking legal advice as to just to confirm that we in Transport Focus and the RDG can do that. And that in due course, when that's set up, that will actually outsource the work, and we will be going through a very transparent procurement process to get an outsourced provider to do the actual adjudication, which happens in a lot of other sectors. It's completely impartial, and they have paralegals or legally qualified people who actually look at the merits of the case and make the decision. What we would do, the new piece of work within ourselves and in Transport Focus would be recruiting 2 to 3 staff on initially fixed-term contracts, where we saw how the work developed, who would actually prepare the cases to go through to the system. So on the basis of this would be once the existing cases have gone through to appeal stage through our existing processes. When we've finalised a case and the passenger's not satisfied with the outcome, at the moment all we can do is say, I'm sorry, we've tried our best. That's all we can do for you. If you think we've not handled it in accordance with our procedures, then you can go to the Ombudsman, but otherwise that's all that can happen. But now, assuming the case is eligible, passengers can be offered the option of going through the adjudication process. And what the new staff we would employ would do would actually make sure the case was ready to go through. So all of the circumstances around the case that might be necessary to explain for someone who wasn't familiar with how the train operators work in London, for example, we would make sure that's there.
The good news is that this is not a completely new issue, because there are redress schemes of a broadly similar kind in a range of other sectors, most obviously water, which has really quite a similar structural setup to what we're talking about here, but also energy, communications sector, financial services sector, a number of the professional bodies. This is fairly common ground, and what we have been able to do is to draw quite extensively from experts from those sectors who've been very helpful and actually very constructive in helping to sort of identify what the issues are, what risks we need to mitigate against.
Okay, so you already employ some caseworkers in the first two-stage process you have. You're proposing to have 2 or 3 executive dispute resolution staff under the new scheme for that third process. Will their job purely to be present the case on behalf of a passenger?
They will prepare the case, present the case. It will be that part of the system. We will be completely impartial. We are very partial in our case.
Okay, that's why I was
so this will be
okay.
So making sure that it's clear.
Okay, because this company limited by guarantee, it says it's going to employ 1 or possibly 1.5 staff to do the governance of the scheme. These 2 to 3 new caseworkers, executive dispute resolution people, you're proposing to employ, why cannot that company limited by guarantee employ them if their job is to be impartial and present an impartial case?
Well, this is efficiency, really. This is where we in Transport Focus are already dealing with the cases. We understand the issues. We can make sure that they're presented, and it's a very streamlined process.
I understand that, but your job is to present the passengers. It just seems to me if you've got some staff that are representing passengers, and then the next stage is going to staff in your same organisation that then have a different view, they're not on behalf of the passengers. They're trying to
they will be completely impartial between the two. Yes. So we will have sort of, separate systems, and they will be sitting separately, and there won't be that crossover in the work. They will pick up the case at the point that it's closed off, if it's eligible, applying the eligibility rules which the company will own once it's set up.
Okay. See,
I'm still not the Minister is very keen that what we set up can be done quickly, builds on what we're already doing, what's already happening out there, improves things, but critically it doesn't set up another new big organisation employing lots more staff.
My question is if you've got this company limited guarantee that is already employing staff for the governance, why they don't employ the dispute executives as opposed to yourself? I just don't know whether there's a benefit there or not.
Well, the governance will just be support for the panel or the adjudicator who will have an overview of it, and will meet, 4 to 5 times a year to make sure that they have the statistics which staff employed within London Travel Watch and Transport Focus will be putting together. Our staff will be doing the correspondence with the passenger, accumulating the statistics, making sure that policy learnings are fed back in, all of those kind of things. So it closes the circle really in terms of what we've not been able to do.
It just strikes me from a legal point of view, if you've got a new entity that's already going to employ some new staff, why they don't employ them rather than you having to go through legal agreements and also potentially be affected by any redundancy payments at the end of the day or recruitment costs or whatever. But I think it's something that the Chair perhaps should, when the final scheme comes back, should just have regard to.
We will be employing staff on temporary contracts, and the whole scheme will be reviewed about 9 months down the line independently to make sure it's being done in the most efficient way, and to see, and this is why we'll set it up on that basis, to give that flexibility. But having spoken to other sectors, we're fairly confident that this is the best and the most efficient way of operating this, and particularly that will work best for the passenger.
And can I ask, the 2 or 3 that are re-employed, is it going to be a national scheme? It's not just for London?
No. It will be 2 or 3 staff in London Travel Watch dealing with the London Rail passenger element, which, as you know, is different because of the interconnectedness of rail. And Transport Focus will be doing the outside the London Railway area from Manchester.
Will they be employing some other
They'll be employing
dispute?
probably 3 to 4 because we expect that their caseload will probably be bigger. But we don't know yet until the scheme starts.
Okay. Fine, but I think just have regards to whether this new entity that's been set up could employ those staff.
Your comments are well taken, Joanne. I mean, we're still getting legal advice, and that's a point to test out. I think the legal advice. It's mostly a technicality, but it's quite an important technicality. So I think that's right. I think what is clear in all of this is that we're under huge pressure to deliver it really fast. That's going quite well. But equally, I think there's going to be a lot of learning as we go along, and actually we need to be quite careful not to set things like resource levels in stone, bearing in mind that there are a lot of unknowns in this situation. What is absolutely in stone is that we cannot, in any circumstances, contemplate any element of the cost falling on London Travel Watch's existing budget, nor can we allow any diversion of resources from our current priorities, which are already tightly stretched, in order to deal with this, important though it is. So we've been very clear about that. The Minister and the RDG and the DFT officials all accept it, but we have to keep plugging away at it because we never know, these things sometimes get chipped away at a bit.
I understand this is quite technical, so you would therefore line manage these new staff from the national scheme, is that right?
For the London part. That builds on the bit of the scheme that will build on what's happening in London, and Transport Focus will manage the bit of the scheme that builds on what's happening outside London.
You see, it just strikes me that there is a potential, when I say potential, possibility of conflict. Because if you're judged on the success of your complaint handling systems in the first 2 stages, and then the staff you're line managing are taking cases to the national scheme, as it were, and a lot of your cases do not succeed at that stage, you know, that could imply certain conflicts as to how those staff are line managed. I'm just putting it out there. It could be a potential cause for conflict.
We're obviously looking at the risks at the moment, and that's the kind of thing that we're looking at. And in terms of the preparatory work that we'll be doing within our organisation and Transport Focus we're doing, and we'll be doing very closely, is better understanding where we might want to streamline procedures or where we need to understand why we might be doing things differently to Transport Focus. There's often a good reason, but we'll need to be very clear because obviously comments will be coming back in due course about it would seem that this kind of case or whatever. So, we'll be very much looking at that, Joanne, because that's a big risk for us in terms of reputation.
Yeah, it is. And can I just ask, finally, have you got any plan Bs in place, I suppose, if there's a higher workload than anticipated and the funding you initially get doesn't cover it? Will you make sure that there is some contingency in whatever agreement you come up with?
We're looking at obviously not wasting money, but making sure that we are very well resourced on the new scheme to pick up that risk, which is one of the reasons for having fixed term contracts, so that, and also for outsourcing the actual adjudication work, because critically, and we have made it very, very clear that we can't do the work unless we're adequately resourced, so we are.
And will you need extra supervision resources, or can you do it within your existing staffing?
We will need extra supervision resources, and that will also be included in what we recharge to the scheme. And certainly for the first year, a proportion of my time, not a big proportion, but a proportion of my time will be recharged. And we're looking at how we can delegate better further within the organisation to free up that senior time. But critically, in terms of proposed supervision arrangements, we have some part-time staff who have agreed that they would increase their hours. So we're actually able to input experienced staff without impacting and recover the cost without impacting on our existing work.
Okay, you see, that leads me back to if those staff are also line managers of your 2-stage. So I think that potential conflict needs to be really well managed.
In terms of surges of work, briefly, first of all, the sorts of outsourcing bodies that do this kind of complaint handling do a lot of it in other sectors. And this is, to some extent, a flexible resource in terms of, you know, there's a surge of complaints, they can find people to do it, as long as they keep the quality standards up and the quality management. Second point, in terms of funding, there's a lot of discussion still to be completed about exactly how the funding structure works. But it is normal for redress schemes in other sectors to have a combination of sort of base funding from the companies concerned and then funding per case, so that if a particular company generates a very large number of redress cases, there's a per head fee that then goes onto that particular item. So I think there are ways of structuring the funding that will actually make that feasible. But you're absolutely right, they're very real risks, and we need to be completely on top of them.
Okay, thank you. I think Joanne has raised some really, really important issues,
yes,
particularly around conflict, and also the issue about who employs the staff, and if you've got staff increasing their hours, the potential conflict, but also their pension costs and all that being covered, the additional costs. So I think, you know, that those do need to be picked up, and obviously ultimately the final decision whether this goes ahead or not is down to us. So I think if you could assure us you're going to look at those, and then if members, we can agree to the principle of London Travel Watch being involved in a proposed rail passengers redress scheme, subject to there being no negative impact on its current work, with all additional costs being met in full by the rail industry, and measures in place to manage potential conflict. I think we should add in there. And then also, can we agree to delegate to myself in consultation with party group leads to make the decision whether or not we do enter into a rail passengers redress scheme?
Yeah. Agreed.
Is that okay? And obviously it's going to be very tight time scale, because you're looking at this coming in from the beginning of April.
The Minister is hoping it will come in from the beginning of April. We have a meeting with him next week, I think it is, and we will be setting out the implications of a soft launch at the beginning of April, or possibly a few weeks later, in terms of actually having had the opportunity to, because it's taking a lot of time to get into the exactly sort of thing you're talking about, Joanne. We spent a couple of hours yesterday doing the risk assessment with Transport Focus, actually, our own risk assessments. There's a lot of work, and the Minister's, I'm sure most of you have met him, but he's terribly enthusiastic. He's very keen that this will go ahead. We are, but we just need to say, this is what we can deliver on this date, just
we
to
will
manage
need to have
his
signed it off
expectations.
before it can go ahead, even the soft launch. We have to have signed it off across Leeds. Is that agreed, members?
Yeah,
okay.
Lovely, thank you. Whilst we've got a couple of items left, I want to welcome pupils from Fairlock Primary School in Redbridge. Welcome. This is the Transport Committee. We're just at the end of our meeting, looking a couple of questions for Travel Watch, which is a passenger watchdog, if you like, for London. But we have been looking at all range of transport issues with the Commissioner for Transport for London this morning, but you've missed that. That was a bit earlier, I'm afraid. So let's move to our final couple of items. Item 8, London Travel Watch correspondence. So this is a letter I'd had about accommodation costs and reply. David, you had a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, so I do understand from this item that there's a possible increase in your rent from your landlord, LFIPA, and there's been correspondence, and the suggestion was made that you seek alternative accommodation. So I'd just like to ask, what steps have you taken to explore alternative office accommodation going forward?
We're looking at our options. We previously worked with a property advisor when we've moved offices previously, so we've taken advice from him. We've spoken to other organisations with which we work closely to see whether there might be options there. But also we have another meeting coming up with the fire service to look at to further discuss the arrangements for our occupation of the building. But we do understand that there will be no more money to support our rent, and that we have to be aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah. Are any of those options viable, do you think, the ones that you've explored?
It would take nothing would be viable in the next few months. I mean, you know, realistically, just in terms of how long it takes to organise this and everything else like that. It could be that we will be able to move in a year's time. But it wouldn't be quicker than that, and we have unfortunately experience of moving offices several times in the last couple of years, so we have quite a well-drilled machine about what we would need to do and how we would do it, but we are looking at the different options, and so the property market we're also hoping might settle slightly as well in due course.
So you think you'll definitely need to stay in the current offices you are in LFIPA for another year at least, and then possibly you might move in a year's time. Is that sort of
that's part of looking at the options, yes, but
about?
realistically I think it would take and there aren't so many options around at the moment, and we also have obligations under the licence that we're with. But we will just continue, I say, looking at our options.
I should add that we have taken from Caroline the clear message that that we need to live within our means, and there won't be any extra budget to pay that increase. So we'll have to find a way of coping, and that's entirely understood. This is sad and regrettable news, because actually the current premises are precisely right for us. They're not luxurious. They're in a good location. We share the premises with a number of other London-based bodies, so there's a London community in the building, if you like. And so moving away will be a retrograde step, but nonetheless it may be necessary if the finances force it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Wanted to come in.
Yeah, could you tell me what is the break clause in your agreement, your rental agreement, or whatever it is?
Well, it's licence, isn't it?
Yeah. We went in November 2 years ago on a 2-year licence, and we were expecting, we obviously built into our budget expectation there would be a rent rise at the end of that, but we had taken informal advice and weren't expecting it to be so much.
So,
what we would be proposing is another year's licence. We've signed an interim licence to allow the fire service to actually give us time to talk to you. So the expectation is that we would sign a licence for another year, backdated from last November, which is when our previous licence expired.
So your lease, your licence, has expired.
Yes, and we're on, but we have another temporary arrangement. We've signed another interim licence, so the fire service are properly covered, acknowledging that once we've sorted, they've been very flexible on this, once we've agreed the budget position.
Okay, I don't get it. I don't understand then why it's going to take you a year to get out.
Oh, just in terms of the logistics of looking for somewhere, finding somewhere that actually practically is cheaper, getting opposite premises ready. Realistically, I don't think we would be able to get out.
Seriously? A whole year? Seriously?
A year from last November? Well,
yeah. Year now, is it?
Yeah.
Well, I find that absolutely incredible, to be honest. If you were in the private sector, you'd do it in a couple of months. But a whole year to move offices,
well,
that is just incredible. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sure we will be returning to this at some point. Members, can we note the correspondence regarding office accommodation for Travel Watch?
Agree.
And then our final item is the Travel Watch Board Chair recruitment. Stephen has been chair for how many years now, is it?
It will be 5 by the time I finish.
5 years,
just under 5 years.
and it's stepping down to the end of September.
That's right.
Your term comes to an end. So this is to agree that we should delegate authority to me to agree the necessary decisions in regards to the recruitment of London Travel Watch Chair in consultation with the Deputy Chair and Party Group lead members.
Agreed.
To make sure we've got enough time to get someone in place. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
And can we put on record our thanks, Stephen, for your huge work over 5 years. It's been very challenging, I know.
You haven't quite seen the last of me yet, anyway.
No, I know. We've got a few months.
For better or for worse.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. We did the date of the next meeting, 19th of April at 2 p.m. in the chamber. There's no other urgent business. Thank you very much, members. Half past. There we go.